Oh, no, you're fine. I understand. I know I feel that. I actually
been doodling, have you?
That's one of my grandsons.
So, yeah, we'll call this meeting to order. The first thing on the agenda, and I feel like I'm stealing your thunder.
No.
Yeah,
Good job.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your service.
yeah, thank you very much. The first item is the only action item on there is the Safe Routes to School KDOT submittal. And Danielle Murray would love to make that presentation.
I would, but I'm going to call it the Safe Routes to School.
I like
I'm up
routes.
north. I know. So about a year ago, we applied for this program through Mid-America Regional Council, the federal funding. We were awarded based on the application we made. So what we applied for was for matching funds from the feds to do a study of the travel patterns in and around the schools that are both in Mission and very close to Mission, so Shawnee Mission North. And with the purposes of coming up with a plan to help encourage students to bike and walk to school. So we were selected based on our application. What you see before you is the first step of committing the city's portion of that, which is an 80-20 match, so ours is the 20%, up to $5,000 to conduct that study. I included in your packet was what our application said to the feds as far as what we would do with that money. Typically a plan includes the 4 categories that you see bulleted in your staff report. So the things that we might do based on the study to encourage walking could be anything from actually making physical improvements to infrastructure, to helping the schools develop programs, to just give incentives to students to walk, educational programming for them, things like that. And then also law enforcement, so speed checks and things like that. So basically, what we applied for is called a Phase 1. There are Phase 2 portions to the Safe Routes to School program. If we successfully complete a Phase 1 study, it puts us in the pool of candidates for Phase 2 money, which then is actually money that goes towards construction if we should identify construction needs. So doing the Phase 1 study helps put us in line for federal funds to make improvements to infrastructure or to invest in programs like walking school buses and things like that. So what you have as an action item tonight is just the first form that we need to fill out. Once we get that submitted to KDOT, they'll actually give us a separate agreement that you'd see again before we actually start the program.
All right. And it's my understanding that we don't know what it's actually going to cost to do the study, so this would be a maximum that we'd be investing in. If it only ran $16,000 to do the study, we'd only spend $4,000, obviously, and you can extrapolate from there.
Yep.
So, all right, go ahead. Anybody got questions? Sure. Dave? Good, thanks. No questions? Any recommendations?
I'm not going to move it to council.
Agreement?
Yep.
Consent okay on that?
I don't think we should move on
You
that.
think we
Because
can
it's-
talk about it?
Cash money?
I mean, I don't know. Not because it's cash money, but just because
Inform people?
yeah, attention that we care about the children and safe routes to school.
And the planning will involve the community when we get to that stage
Sure.
of the plan. So.
Okay, good.
Since I don't have any other agenda items, I'm just going to share some good news with everybody because I seem to be forgetting to tell some folks, but I am pregnant.
I wanted to ask, but I wasn't going to ask. Like, oh, do I ask, do I not ask?
Cat keeps coming out of the bag, and I'm never sure who's around to see it. But I ran into Martin today, and we had like a 10-minute conversation, and then he looked at me like he didn't know what the heck I was talking about, and I realized I hadn't told him yet. So there you go.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. When are you due?
November.
What?
Oh,
Hey,
wow.
that's my birthday.
November 17th.
10. Let's go. Early. Let's go.
Leave early.
It's your birth month, mine's the 3rd.
Oh, but that's mine's Saturday. Scorpios all the way.
Because Dave Shepard insisted we have this, we're talking about the urban chickens.
Yeah,
And beekeeping.
that's high on my list, that's exactly right. Apologize to all you in the audience who are here to speak about it.
Now, it's actually come up a few times, and nothing wrong with discussing this and seeing if there's any action that doesn't need to be taken on it. So we'll turn it over to Glen to explain what's going on. And this is James here.
Yes, has
James.
everybody met
Has everybody
James?
met
No.
James? James Gorham. He is our newest neighborhood services officer. He joined us back in March, first part of March. And he came to us from the city of Olympia. And did a great job for us.
Okay, Glenn?
Yeah, so not too much of a presentation. Mostly we've heard from a citizen who contacted Mr. Vaughn here.
They're in the audience too.
They are in the audience, so they can come up and talk if they want, that they're interested in keeping chickens in the city. And then separately, Amy, I think was, no? Well, someone brought up bees, right?
Yeah, I did.
So we mostly just wanted to put together some information, present it to you, see if you want us to change our approach on doing this at all, prepare an ordinance, anything like that. Right now, we prohibit chickens. Our ordinance doesn't really speak to how we would handle bees, if at all. I would, depending on the situation, we may or may not call that a dangerous animal. That kind of comes down to the animal control officer. And the beehive might end up being called an accessory structure, which would be controlled by zoning. But again, these things aren't specifically spelled out. And you may prefer to spell out that beekeeping is prohibited, or you might just want to keep it how it is. So we put together a few things. The first is just a table showing how other Johnson County communities regulate this. And you can see it's all across the board. Some cities prohibit it outright. Some cities, including our neighbors, Roland Park, allow people to do it if they come before council, kind of plead their case and seek a permit. And then still other cities, such as Shawnee, just pretty much allow it. You have to come to staff, get a permit, renew it annually, show that there have been no complaints or anything like that. But otherwise, they're allowed, much like any other pet. So we've also put in a few articles that have been in local publications, a little more on kind of the provisions you see in some of these ordinances as far as requirements like setbacks, maximum number of animals, things like that, just to give you a clue of the kind of things you could regulate if you wanted to get into this space and start allowing this. And then we also put in a copy of the letter Mr. Vaughn received. So, I don't know.
Question for you, did you, when we look at like Shawnee, do we know if resident gets approved and they allow that, do they go out and check that, the structure, the setback, everything, they monitor that?
Monitoring is not quite the word I would use.
Okay.
They go out once a year and they physically examine the shelter, make sure they have a few requirements as far as the shelter, just providing, an enclosed space, safe from rain, safe from predators, things like that. But they just physically look at the shelter and that's it. When they reevaluate that permit every year, they look and see if there have been complaints from neighbors, and they have a points-based system to where if there have been complaints, if there have been issues reported by an animal control officer, if there are so many of those, they do not renew the permit, and then those people have to get rid of those animals. Go ahead.
Has there been any discussion around, I don't know if it's it's not the bird flu maybe, but there's been a significant number of chickens that have been destroyed, like thousands of chickens, and people who grow them or raise them, like large organizations, companies who raise them. So just thinking about in line with the emerald ash borer, right? And just thinking about having chickens who could be prone to illness. What would we have it dictate that everybody must kill their chickens if we had chicken? I mean, has there been any?
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything on a local level. I've just heard on it as a corporate level.
Sure. So I would kind of preface that by saying, as you're thinking about this question as a body, you're kind of answering two questions, right? The first is, are chickens, are bees, are keeping these animals right for mission? And that's a decision clearly for you guys as a body to decide. The second is, can we appropriately regulate and control a program that keeps these animals safely in the city? And as the past few years have looked at other communities doing that, I think you can say the answer there is yes. The instances you're hearing about are, as you alluded to, factory farms, instances where you have thousands of chickens in a small enclosed space where you can spread disease easily. You don't really have that in these situations where you have a few chickens. Now, I will tell you, there is one sort of niche circumstance that comes up in the media once in a while that people do have to be aware of, which is when you have children playing with chickens. You know, chickens are in an enclosed space. They roll around in things that are pretty gross. So you will hear about a kid once in a while getting salmonella or another disease because they're not washing hands, they're playing with chickens, and, you know, hand to mouth. But on the whole, as a public health issue, it's not that big of a deal.
I happened to be at the Rothrock Park City Council meeting when they adopted theirs last month, and there were 5 to 7 people there interested in raising chickens. And I thought it was the most interesting part, there wasn't one neighbor there, contingent with them, parallel behind them, in front of them, anywhere. And to me, that would be the biggest situation, is they have to, just like if you have more than 2 dogs and 2 cats, you have to have the neighbors around you say okay to that. I would want, instead of reactive by virtue of somebody's complaint, I would like that up front. If we move in that direction, that the neighbors on all sides are okay with that. Because, I mean, they may have a dog that's gonna bark all night because of the chicken. You have to kind of look at the surroundings without just one entity. That's my perspective.
Well, that's an interesting point, Debbie, because well, and the reason I say that is because I look at Olathe and Overland Park, and not that we want to load up our planning commission with any more responsibilities, but both of them involve the planning commissions to look at this on a, if I'm reading it correctly, kind of a case-by-case basis, and they say, okay, what might work, you know, east of one street or north of another street, you know, may not be the same in another area. And so I think that's a little bit of Debbie's point, not just, you know, neighbors, but also, you know, got to take in size of lots and proximity of neighbors and some things like that. So I think that is intriguing to me, to involve those folks, again, not to load the planning commission up with additional work, but if this is something that we want to take into consideration. The other thing too is, Glen, in your research, was there much conversation about, you know, when this came up the last time, beyond, you know, kids and chickens and the issues that might create? You know, if my golden retriever goes into your yard and, you know, kills your chicken, I mean, you know, what happens then, right? And so does that default to the animal control laws that are on the books, or, you know, does that open up a whole other group of ordinances that we're going to have to consider?
I think that would be covered. So right now we have dangerous animal ordinances,
Right.
which would be triggered if you had an animal to person or an animal to an animal attack.
Right.
And so I would suspect we might look at a little bit of tweaking, but that would probably still apply.
And I think, right, well, I get that, but what I guess I'm saying is, I get it's one thing if my golden retriever comes over and attacks you or attacks your golden retriever, right? It's a whole nother thing if we're talking about, you know, I don't know what adjective you use to describe a chicken, but if it goes over and kills a chicken, and the same applies, we might have some issues, because if my dog comes to your yard and kills your squirrel, we don't have any issues, right? So I'm just saying, there are some things like, and those kinds of things that if we don't get out in front of, will,
Right.
you know, come back and create a lot more work for staff than anybody intends to. So.
Well, and I know those are the issues and concerns in Roland Park that I'm hearing also via animal control, is that there are loose dogs that are getting into people's backyards.
Right.
And
And so, I mean, then you still have the whole issue of we don't allow at-large dogs, right? We may allow cats to be on the loose, that kind of thing. So there's still some things that would be applicable, but, you know, like Pat, you know, I was on the Northeast Animal Control Commission as treasurer for a number of years, and I, you know, empathize with those guys because they have 6 different cities and 6 different sets of ordinances that they have to know and apply and enforce, and I just don't want to create any unintended, you know, consequences for us.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, look, the letter that this young man wrote, I don't know if everybody, Mr. Taylor wrote, was very compelling, and I mean, it's probably worth, you know, taking a look at.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, would you guys mind hearing from the family?
Love to.
All right.
Well, hi, I'm Megan, and this is my son, Jack. Hi. And we've lived here in Mission for 9 years now, since Jack was a baby. He's 9 years old, and we love living in Mission. We have a really nice little vegetable garden in our backyard, And I also have a 4-year-old and a baby who's 9 months old. And it was included in my packet, but I don't know if you can like see the chicken coop that we included, like scroll down to that. You know, what you said about the dogs getting in the yard, I hadn't really even thought about that. And that, you know, probably would be traumatizing because we're interested in having like 2 chickens who produce just enough eggs for our family to eat, and kind of going with our garden and self-sustaining, feeding, and teaching my boys about how to raise their own food and be healthy. This structure, something like it, is what we would build, and it's fully enclosed. So I mean, it would have to be a really big, scary dog to get in there and get my chickens.
Right.
And just things like, well, like the way that I take care of my home and we take care of our yard, continually cleaning the hay, keeping the hens clean so they can be with my boys. And I personally have never owned chickens, but have a lot of friends who have. And having an extra kind of like, I don't know if any of you have those dog fences that you can kind of let a small dog like wander around so that they can come out and have a little bit of extra space when we're in the yard playing. But they would be enclosed, so with the dog issue, I would kind of think that would also be sort of our problem, and that we're not keeping our chickens safe from predators. And so if it did happen, I would fault myself just as much as anyone else that hadn't thought about that issue. But again, we're not like wanting to do anything big or stinky. They're very loud. They're not very loud at all. Our neighbors who have a dog who barks constantly at everything when we're out in the yard.
Not when you're out in the yard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Barking all the time.
Yeah.
And so they go like this. They go, and maybe when they lay an egg, they go, you know, that's it. And so noise or disease or any of those things, those concerns, or like you were saying, are from those big factories where they're...
But they still are disease. They can't promote disease.
Right, they can have lice just like dogs and cats, and they can, yeah, that can happen. But, you know, I think the benefits for our family and some of the other friends that we have in the neighborhood who also are kind of on the same wavelength as us with the vegetables and things. I don't think there's probably very many people who would take advantage of having chickens. But those of us who want to, I think our point of view is we don't see what harm it would do to anyone, so can we please be able to have a few chickens? I don't know. Jack, do you have anything else to say? I talked so much, I get so excited. I think Jack is one who thought it would be a cool idea to begin with, and so part of this is for him too.
The other thing we talked, when we were talking the other day, you weren't looking for a rooster either.
Well, of course not, no.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need one. We
Yeah,
don't
just
want
wanna make sure.
a baby chicken farm, we just want pigs, so, yeah. Rooster would be a big deal, yeah, that would, our neighbors would hate us, so we don't want to do that.
And the other key is, also, another thing we don't think about is that, you know, a lot of the yards around here are fenced, which is another help from a dog perspective. So maybe.
Except for the big huge dog that the Doberman that runs wild and
And
jumps
maybe
over my
jumps over.
neighbor's fence.
Okay.
It's not. I'm like,
Okay.
it's crazy. He's the hugest dog. He just jumps right over. He shouldn't be out running around, but he does.
Okay.
No,
So
but I
things
mean,
may help
yeah,
something along
no,
the
no,
way.
no. I mean, I
That's a dog
personally
owner problem.
Yeah.
we should really look into this. I probably am more apt to support chickens versus bees. Bees make me nervous because there are people who are deathly allergic to a bee sting and just promoting them around. I mean, so again, more cities allow bees than chickens. I see that, but that's what makes me nervous. And I had a friend who had her neighbor's entire swarm ended up in her tree. This was a ginormous swarm of bees, and it just decided to come out of their home and go into their tree. But I personally am very interested in this. I think it would be great, especially given the interest in urban farming and sustainability. I would like to see more about it. I do think, I think Glen or Laura, one of you were kind of talking about these in terms of maybe pets or almost like pets. And I think that from my perspective, if somebody has a loose animal, be it a dog or a cat or a ferret, I mean, I don't know what, you know what I mean? And it gets into a neighbor's yard and attacks their animal. To me, if it attacks a chicken, it's just like if it attacked their cat or dog. I think the one thing that we probably ought to be aware of as we look at this is we already have people who complained about foxes. So if we have foxes in the area, right, there are coyotes that have been more prolific in Northeast Johnson County in the past few years. So those, I mean, having things like chickens would promote, but again, to your point, it would be up to the homeowner to ensure, or to the owner of the chickens to ensure the safety and the structure I agree with Dave's point that we have to think about the additional burden on staff and what kind of maintenance do we have about it. Debbie, I find your comment interesting. I don't necessarily, we probably need to talk more about getting the neighbors' approval, because like, to Jason's point, I didn't approve my neighbors having 2 little dogs that bark all the time incessantly. And I mean, they have dogs, but I didn't get a say in them having dogs. So I think that's kind of like we look at chickens, you know, are they like pets, are they not? And where do we draw that line as to who gets a say? Because probably there's going to be at least one neighbor who says absolutely no way.
Well, and that could be part of, I again don't know how this works, part of the permit, almost like, you know, before you get a law passed, getting some signatures, and I'd be happy to go to my, you know, perimeter neighbors and have them sign off on it and show them what the structure would look like or explain to it. I know most of them, and if they weren't okay with it, having a conversation with them, trying to convince them or not, you know, that would nip it in the bud right there, because it's not worth me hurting my relationship with my neighbors to have these chickens.
But I think to your point, we need to define how we consider it, because we don't, if you have a dog, you don't have to go ask
Right.
anybody if you can bring another dog in.
Right.
So
If
we
I have a
figure-
snake, I don't have to ask
Right,
anybody.
we need
If
to
I
figure
have-
that out.
Right.
And also, would this require an occupational permit or anything, because it's actually a product?
No,
They're
you
using
know,
it.
different
They're not
than
selling it.
having a
No.
vegetable, I mean, having a vegetable garden, you know, you're producing something for your own, you know, your own
Okay, just like a
consumption.
vegetable.
I think absolutely we want to think about, you know, I think obviously we have options in terms of involving the planning commission through a special use permit process, or as Shawnee does, or some of the other cities, whether it's staff or the planning commission, we want to be very specific about the parameters and the conditions so that there's that consistency. And the ability to address, I mean, with a special use permit that's ultimately issued by the council, if those conditions aren't met over time, you have the ability to revoke that, you know, obviously. And I think it sounds that, you know, Shawnee has that same, that with their point system, they have the ability to say,
I like that.
you know, you aren't, you know, you kind of aren't meeting those conditions. I think this becomes a little bit different than dogs or cats potentially, because you are dealing with an accessory structure. And so you're talking about, you know, we do regulate sheds and, you know, other kinds of things that go in backyards and side yards in terms of distance from property lines and some of those kinds of things. So I think there are some of those factors that, you know, that are different than if you are having dogs and cats.
Well, if you have a
I
dog
was
run.
going to say, well,
Yeah,
we're
dog
going to talk to a
house.
dog house, because you can put the
Yeah.
dog house, my dog house is
Right.
bigger enough for my dog, and she was out all the time, so then we just have to look at that and
Yes,
discuss
it's a good
that.
point.
But it's a great point to think about the structure there.
Well, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming forward,
Yeah,
because
thank you.
your primary function is teaching your kids things, and I think that goes a long way. You're a terribly responsible person. Everybody here is not responsible. I mean, I'm not.
She's not talking about us.
What she looks like.
Collectively in the
Everyone around this-
world.
I don't know what she's talking
I
about.
understand that I would probably guess that, but most people who even want to have it, I would feel like be on the same wavelength as me. I mean, you have to feed them, you have to take care of them, and I don't know, our neighbors on our street take good care of their houses and take good care of their yards, so I don't know why they would bring, you know, I've heard property values being an issue, and I just see them.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, but I think that that's something that you really have to take in consideration. The chickens, if you do not move the coop on a regular basis,
Right.
it will ruin your yard, and your yard will become dirt. I mean, I've been involved with raising chickens when I was a kid, and it is not pretty, and they're very dirty. Like, I begged my father, let's have chickens, and he's like, they're the most dirty, disgusting, gross, horrible things ever. I'm never raising a chicken ever again, because they raised them their whole lives as kids. So I get that and I appreciate that. I think that there is, as with anything that's new and unique and different, when you don't have exposure to it, you're going to learn, right? You're just going to learn.
And that
You're gonna
may
see
very
it.
well be
Right.
the case. We may spend $250 building this chicken coop, and then it
6
not
months later, but this doesn't work out.
Right, this was
and
a
we
lot
have
of
fried chicken for dinner. I don't know what will happen.
Right, no, or it might work out great. I mean,
Right, and seeing all the other neighborhoods around, like Roland Park and similar neighborhoods allowing it, so.
No, I personally think it would be great. I personally think it's great. I think it's a lot for us to take into consideration and think about.
Well, I don't know how you would word this or what the verbiage would be. I would almost like a case-by-case basis to come forward, because you seem like the ideal people. Everybody is not you.
Right.
Well, when we took this back in 2009, I think the process that we talked about was coming up with at least a draft ordinance that everybody around this table would be comfortable with. So whether that was including the planning commission or case-by-case basis or certain setbacks, or limiting the number of chickens, excluding roosters, whatever it is, coming up with a draft ordinance that we would be comfortable with, majority of us. And then from there, holding a public hearing and making sure that we're just not hearing from the folks that are in support of it. There very well may be an overwhelming majority of folks in our community that have some of Amy's same sentiments about, chickens. And so we need to do a public hearing, and then based on that draft, that public hearing, come back to this table. And so, Jack, one of the things that you'll learn about municipal government is, unfortunately, it does not move very fast, right? And so most people get upset about that, but I will also tell you, they get more upset when it moves too quickly, right? So we'll get started on this, but it's going to take us a couple of months to draft an ordinance and then get all the neighbors in Mission who are interested to come and provide some feedback, then come back here. And we'll make sure you're plugged in all the way. So if you want to keep following this or come back with your own thoughts, we'll do that as well, okay?
And in 2009, did it make it this far, or did it get nipped in the bud before an ordinance?
No, we had a public hearing, we had a
You
draft
did.
ordinance, and then ultimately,
And it was
at the
people
time.
who came that didn't want it.
Yeah, but there was probably only 5 or 6 people that came that spoke on it. They spoke for probably a total of 45 minutes. And it was all 5 or 6 people that were completely against it. And I think myself being one of them, I voted against the non-smoking ordinance the first time too. I ended up supporting that the second go around, right? So all I'm saying is that there's a process and sentiments, things change, and there's outside factors. So
It didn't pass the first time, but
Good night.
we're reconsidering.
New
We
perspective.
appreciate you.
And
guys.
one thing that hasn't been addressed is, what would you use for protection in the winter for the chickens? I mean, do they have to have special?
Right,
feeders and
so
stuff?
my friend who lives in Iowa, because that was my question, I'm like, are they have to come in the house?
Definitely become
She
fried
said
chicken.
that unless it gets very, very cold, they're fine in the winter. They go mostly up in their little roost area, but that she has used heat lamps before, if they need that. And we have, a shed with electricity and, we'll do a power cord, but that was definitely a question I had. So what we've researched and what we've read and all the stuff we've looked through, it seems very doable for us and our family, something that we're interested in trying.
And when they get too hot, they quit laying eggs. So if they get too hot, you have to be careful in the extremes.
So you have to have the air conditioner too.
Or you just don't have eggs for a few weeks in
No.
August and September. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you guys so much.
I appreciate it.
So-
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, baby. Thank you.
This is just discussion, but
Jack, you're
based
coming
on
the rest
this
of the process,
discussion.
right?
I think I have a clear
All right.
cut on chicken, so how about beef?
Right, that's chicken. You're gonna come back to us with some kind of a draft ordinance.
Process.
Okay, how many people have asked about bees? Have we had
I've
several
only
people?
had one.
I have one.
I had one.
Really?
That's 3. So, yeah, I don't think it's a big deal, probably not nearly as crucial as chickens, but the thing that kind of surprised me when I looked into it was finding out that we had no restrictions on it. I mean, I could have bees right now if I wanted them with no restrictions. I could put them right up against your fence if you live next door.
But there's a lot of things like that we don't have specifics for. We can't have a rhinoceros or an elephant. Those aren't all addressed either.
Well, they are.
My elephant's coming.
Oh.
Coming tomorrow.
They are actually.
No peacocks.
Exotic
No
animals.
exotic
No
animals.
emus, no more emus?
No, buddy, this.
I was surprised that they allowed more cities had bees than they had chickens, because I would think that bees would be maybe more of a,
Potential to it.
more of a liability issue. If somebody
They're
gets
actually, the
stung.
honeybees
unless-
really aren't aggressive.
I've been stung. I would
Well,
bait.
when you swat at them like that,
Well, yeah.
they will
When you're
defend
out
themselves.
working
So I think one of the
Their
questions
home.
then is, if the ordinance is silent, and I think when Pat and I were doing a gender review yesterday, and one of his questions to me was, well, so if somebody came in and set up some beehives, and then we had a complaint about it, what's our mechanism, if you will, to deal with that? And so the question is, do we want to stay silent, or do you want to, particularly if we're going to look at a process for chickens, do you want to use a similar approach where you look at bees on a case-by-case basis? with similar, you know, requirements, and you can have that ability to evaluate. So that at least the ordinance would
I
say.
don't want you guys to laugh me off the table here, but there is a national and a worldwide crisis with honeybees. Yeah.
You need to come to my backyard, I've got them all. I have the world's
That's where they're all going.
population in my backyard. But,
And so I think nationally, anyway, they're really trying to promote this stuff, and I think we may see more and more interest in it, so it might be a good time to decide whether we want to address it one way or the other.
I agree with you, Pat. Just let's put it out there. It kind of encompasses all these types of urban type farming from animal bees or chickens or whatever. Just put that out there and kind of try to address a block.
Well, I'm gonna have to think about it. I mean, potentially goats and,
You know, I kind of like
Not
this case-by-case
exotic goats.
basis, though. I thought that was an interesting way to take it, because she was extremely, yeah, did not mind, did not hesitate to want to go to her neighbors, and if there was going to be an issue, she did not want to create a problem. You don't have that with every neighbor in this city.
in any city.
Yes.
Any neighbor.
And that, you know, and I really appreciate that out of her. So if, you know, we have so many options with this
Yeah.
case by case. I have he gave me a flower today, a patient of mine who's a beekeeper, and he said, oh, absolutely not, Jennifer, you wouldn't want to in the city. Well, and I thought, you know,
Wait,
perfect
he's a
person to ask.
beekeeper?
Yes, he had a bee farm.
And he said you wouldn't want them in your city.
He said, no, he said, if they're up in a tree, their line of flight is way above.
Right.
But if you bring them down, their line of flights, I said, okay, Gene, that makes sense. You know, but I know that they do have them in cities.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know, you know, there's a lot I don't know, and I really don't have a horse in the race. I'm not worried one way or the other.
Could,
So what about RC, you said you've heard from, was it a resident that was
Yeah.
interested in keeping them, or?
It was just a general, hey, do you know anything about any ordinances for bees? I was thinking about, you know, getting a few hives and kind of raising them, so.
And you had, your call was an individual who was considering moving to Mission.
To see if we
To
prohibit
see if we
them.
prohibited them.
and we don't. Would it be a major problem for you guys, I say you guys, staff somewhere, to contact some of these other cities that allow them and find out if they have problems, if there's
We can do that.
complaints?
Are we much different in our topography than Shawnee? Like, are a lot of those huge lots and country places, Olathe, Shawnee, you know, we are
KCK,
3 miles and fairly close proximity. I don't know if that makes a difference.
There are areas of both cities, so especially Shawnee, Old Town Shawnee, where you have our size lots, you know, our level of density.
And their ordinances reflect, you know, distance, I mean, it's designed to work
The
for
setbacks.
a small lot, yeah, small
And
lot.
that's why it's a case-by-case basis on those, like Olathe, I mean, there's acreage people have, but
Yeah.
there's Old Town Olathe where it's just like here. That's why it's out well.
Well, and then you go to like the Caribbean and the West Indies, and they have a cow that's on a lot that's this big. You know what I mean? Their cows tied to posts. You know what I mean? So.
Like I said, there was a guy right up the street from me that had a couple of horses for years.
For years.
And years, so, yeah, most people didn't even know it was there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
And this may be totally outside the realm, but just for purposes of discussion, you know, you might have a family that lives in an apartment, and why should that child be deprived of watching chickens grow up if they came to an agreement with the apartment owner that they could use the common place for something like that? You gotta kind of think outside what could be, because that's what ends up happening. That's my biggest concern. So the case by case to me is much better.
And see, I don't like the case by case because I don't want to get in, well, you did this for Susie, but you didn't do it for Bobby. And why did you do it for this person? You didn't. I mean, I like having a little bit more structure around that takes it out of the it makes it less subjective and makes it more objective. I mean, I see what you're saying.
That's exactly right.
So,
I think whether we define it as an animal, like I guess I keep on with the dog thing. Nobody asks if you can have a dog. We don't require a fence, we don't require a house for them out there in the yard. We don't say you can't
Require
tie them
a
up,
leash,
you know, we
that's
require a
it.
leash, but that's it. So if we're gonna view them as an animal, then they get them whether or not.
Well, one of the things brought up in the last one, just went back on the last minutes, and I'm not saying it's totally irrelevant, but somebody brought up the fact that oftentimes chickens attract mice and rodents and
They
things
do.
like that, so.
They
I
can.
mean,
Foxes,
but
Right.
not-
coyotes.
we're not looking
The problem
at
is,
lions,
we're-
I mean, that's gotta be part of the consideration for the
But the
conversation.
problem is, we're talking about the bees right
Oh.
now. We already did the chickens, they're gonna
Okay.
bring us up about.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, in general, there's some appeal to a case-by-case basis, but as clear as criteria that, minimum criteria, that then still allows for some flexibility is where we are starting on
With the
this,
chickens.
right? With the chickens and the bees, it sounds like.
I'm in favor of that.
I didn't hear a definitive answer on the bees, but I thought,
Yeah, and I think
just
that's-
kind of look at it,
yeah, I
let's take
think
it out
that's,
of the conversation.
From my perspective, and I think the goal and objective is, whether it's a version, 2 versions, 3 versions, that the next step is, if we're gonna move forward with this, we have to come up with a version of a draft ordinance that we all feel comfortable with.
Right,
And
yeah.
I think the way you have recaptured that is on target. And we'll inevitably miss something that we'll put back in or clarify, but.
We can always, sure, revisit.
Well, since we're discussing, Laura, would you like to give us an update here on the Herald Corner Development Agreement?
I would. I think we had advised the council a couple of weeks ago that, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Welcome to the
Thanks,
family.
Marlene.
Herald Corner, Brinshore development on the former Neff property did not receive their tax credits in the 2015 cycle. We put this on as a discussion item tonight because Brinshore was not going to be able to sit down and debrief with the state until the end of this week or the first week next. And so until they really understand why they scored where they did in this year's process. Their initial comments to us have been that they are interested in making a formal request to the city to extend the contract for another year. They want to go back through the tax credit cycle. But until they sit down and kind of debrief with the state, they don't know that definitively. So since that meeting wasn't going to happen prior to tonight's meeting, we wanted to just kind of let you know that what we expect is they'll get through that process, we'll sit down with them again, and then they will make whatever formal request they are going to make, and we'll bring that forward to your July 1st Community Development Committee meeting. So right now, if you were to not extend the contract would be null and void, and
As of what day?
it's essentially, at whatever point you would take that action. I mean, it's effectively, you could walk away from it
Did
right
we,
now.
I thought we extend it.
We did a 1-year term for them.
Yes, but that basically is up sort of at that July 1st
Okay.
kind of timeframe. And so if, and a portion of their earnest money stayed, if they walked away from that contract, was held to be applied toward the demolition of that. I think it was somewhere $12,000 to $13,000 for that. And so that's where we would stand if you did not extend the contract. We would continue to own the property, and we would have $12,500 of Brinshore's money that we would apply toward the demolition costs for that site. And then we would make a decision about how we would move forward with that.
Remind me the zoning on that? What's the zoning?
What's the, I don't know the zoning specific, the zoning.
It's industrial.
Industrial?
So first go around, they came up they were like one short, right? They took 15
Right.
and they were 16.
Right.
And if I read the memo correctly, they were a distant second this time.
They don't know, and that's part of what they don't know. They don't know how far outside of the list of approved candidates overall. What they have been told is that they had the highest per unit development costs of 8 other projects in the Kansas City metropolitan area, but they don't know how that translates into,
Okay.
right?
All right, so
Were
we won't
we
make assumptions.
16, yes, so that's part of why we were a little bit premature in really being able to make a formal request at this point.
So my thought, just real quick, Jennifer, is one, I think kudos to us that we found other people's money to tear down a building that needed to come down.
Well,
Right?
some of
So,
it,
not a huge chunk, but a little more than 10%, something like that.
We're good with that.
You're right.
Better than us paying them.
So the second piece is, I saw that they had two options. One, extend the contract as is, or two, execute on the contract, which is rebating them to 37.5 that's in escrow. Depending upon what you learn from them, and if you say, but this plan doesn't have any chance, the best thing to do is to rebate it. But if we decide to extend the contract, I would be in favor of entertaining some terms that
Yeah.
did one of two things. One, that re-upped or just doubled down on what we did. It cost how much to tear, and I understand that we would get full reimbursement
If they ultimately purchase.
if they
right?
ultimately purchase, but if they don't, I would be willing to do one of two things, or a combination. One, double down and get another 25% of the earnest money to apply towards demolition, and I think it might be best to do an and, they can still have the option on the property, but if somebody else comes knocking on the door
I like that.
and says, hey,
You get the first right.
or, Mr. Christie says, boy, I just love building in Mission, right? And I've got two great uses for this, and I know Pete Heaven can't wait to work with him again, so I mean, just. So that's an and or.
Or and,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's my thought.
So what does it mean by the per unit cost is so high, higher compared to, what it goes into that unit cost? The purchase of the property?
No, I think it may be, some of it is the purchase price of the property. It's going to be the materials that they're using to construct that.
So and I'm sorry to interrupt you, where I'm going with this is, my concern is, obviously this company does this for a living. They've done several of these, right? So it's surprising that the materials and how they're choosing to develop it from their cost perspective of what they're putting into it is at a rate that's higher than a going rate.
I
It would
think
seem that
that's
it's probably
because
pretty
of
reasonable.
that there's only 32 units there. If you're building a 108 unit development or whatever, I think your per unit cost would come down considerably.
But
Kansas City
again,
region-wide too, it's not just Johnson County. If it were Johnson County, like from 50th to 135th, it may be higher, that may be normal, but the Kansas City region, I think, is one of the things to be looking at too.
Well,
So
so what we
what-
don't
so-
know is, for example, if last year there were no other projects in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and this year if there were 8 in the metropolitan area, but I don't know who those developers were. If you've got one developer that's developing 3 or 4 projects, there are economies of scale that go into their construction as well. So we just don't have, until they sort of debrief and get more information, we won't know. But I think it's what they've indicated to us, at least initially, is they think they know some ways they could bring those unit costs down. I think we would want to be very sensitive to that in terms of the quality of the development
And the design.
that's occurring. Correct. So,
and also any additional incentives they're looking for from the city. I don't know how much less expensive from our viewpoint we could make the development for them, is my concern. So I'd really like to understand what's going into the unit cost, and if they believe that the city has some involvement in there and could come back and help reduce that unit cost. My next thing, I appreciate Dave's consideration and thought. I think that that's a great idea. My questions are, is there any way we can kind of get out of this development agreement with them now, open up the property to the general community and developers, and for a period of, 6 months, and see if people are interested in developing it now that the property has been abated and the structure has been removed? See if there's anybody else at this point in time, given the economy and the Johnson Drive development. Things have significantly changed in our city when this process started a couple of years ago. See if there's anybody really interested in it, and then just give that a period of 6 months, and if nobody comes to the table, great. And then we just get back into it with, Brinshore can come back and say, yeah, we're ready to take another go at it.
Well, that would probably be an option if they didn't like the contract that Dave mentioned with the change in there to where if they don't build on there, if somebody does come forward, they don't want anybody else right now. They want an exclusive on that. So if they had this change where we're going to open it up, you'll still have first right of refusal, but we're gonna open it up and bring other people in. I kinda like that idea, because then you're still getting the other people in there if there's any interest, but if there's not, you've got them locked into another 12.5% of their earnest money or whatever it is that we.
But so again, I know,
So it would take away from what you.
Yeah.
I think we're after the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm worried about increases the unit cost.
Right, and I do believe that, one in the hand, two in the bush, so to speak. And I do believe in the study, and if Jason, if you haven't seen it, it's worth getting you a copy of, and I always forget the name of it, Laura. but
Lost opportunity.
The term of art is lost opportunity. If it wasn't gonna be a Brinshore development, what else would it be? And you can believe it, you don't have to believe it, but the study essentially said it would be nothing. It's, the location of this site is really difficult. The reason why the Herb Jones site sat vacant for so long and no one purchased it and it was allowed to come into the condition that it did is it's very difficult for retail or hotel or residential. And so I still think Brinshore has a really viable plan here. I'd like to keep them engaged. So I'd like to, I guess, be able to have both, maybe. I mean, I want to open it up to the market
Right.
for sure.
Yeah, but I think the other thing is, and not to take away from what you said, Dave, it didn't say you can't do anything, and it didn't say it's going to be very difficult. It just said that in its current state, which its current state has completely changed since that study was done, that they couldn't find anything that was really overly attractive about it, and since you already had an offer on the table, you might as well just take the offer on the table. So sometimes the offer on the table isn't the most advantageous offer. Sometimes waiting a little bit when the situation has changed, as it has significantly changed in our city since that time, maybe the opportunity and the interest is different now. And I don't know if having right of first refusal type of things, an agreement on the condition makes it less attractive for other developers. I don't know, I'm not a developer, right? I would look for somebody who's an expert in that area to give their opinion on that. I just personally would rather see additional revenue generation to come from a development on that site. The other thing is, I think we've heard from several people over the last year, especially in terms of the, comprehensive plan and all of the master plan and things that we're looking at, that people keep saying, let's not have yet another, senior housing facility in our small city. So I think that this is an opportunity to kind of listen to the feedback we're getting from residents and opening it up to anybody and everybody, free and clear, to see for a period of 6 months. And then if we have nothing better, we go back to Brinshore and hopefully they're still interested.
I'll be curious to see what they learn in early June and what you guys come back with in July.
Is that information going to be able to change what they can do this year? It won't be able to, no. So.
But what they may learn there is they may say, wow, third time's a charm, and they come back to the table very motivated and say, we're willing to guarantee a whole lot more than 25% because the last thing that we want to have happen is this piece of ground go away.
Right.
So, more information will help us make a better decision, but it's good discussion.
And they could choose to just develop it without all the tax credits.
They could.
If they really wanted to do it, they could just develop it.
Okay, so
Okay.
we'll bring that back in July.
Thank you.
Under the other categories, got a few things there. A little update on the farmer's market. Emily Randel. Is Emily Randel in the house?
Are you exhausted? Has she slept in the last 30 hours?
Hi everyone. We reached the week, right? So I feel actually really good about it. We have our solid group of vendors. We think we'll be at 11 on Saturday. I know I have more in the wings, so I feel like next week, a week from Saturday will be a different story, and a week from Saturday, as other people kind of get serious. I think there's a wave that just haven't gotten themselves organized enough to be with us on the 6th.
It's been so rainy.
Well, that's true. Then some of the farming logistics actually are holding people back too, I think. And then some people are just hearing about us because of the buzz, and they're interested, and I think that will only grow.
The sign is beautiful.
I know, I love it. I really love it. Thank you. Yeah, I think it turned out really well. I don't know what you need to know now. The only things, I think we have really good momentum building up to Saturday. Just please pray for not monsoon conditions.
Our ambassadors.
Yeah, so ambassadors, Mr. Quinn will be joining us, Mary Schoengert, Jackie Gameson, lots of our usuals. I'm not thinking of all of the shifts, but the board and commissions, Aaron Beasley.
Who are the
and
two
Jill
so I'm not the ambassadors, not the coordinators.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, our coordinators are Carrie and Allison, and they are both great, and they've been meeting with me fairly regularly.
And who are they? Where are they from?
One of them is a former Shawnee Farmers Market vendor. She and her mother craft, and she works at the DMV here in Mission, so she's handy. And another one is a Highlands mom of 3, I believe, and has her own embroidery business and has an arts and volunteer management background.
Mission resident.
And Mission
Awesome.
resident, right. So they're outstanding. I mean, they came on and my stress level was, like, they're great. They're very enthusiastic and they're willing to pitch in and do great work. So I think that's going to be great. They'll be with us our first 2 weeks together, and then they'll start shifting one off each week. And I think our ambassadors will have a lot greater visibility once we actually have a market. We'll have a sign-up sheet and we'll get more volunteers. But if you know of anyone who's interested in neighbors and such.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Do you need volunteers? Are you
Yes.
still looking for them?
Yes.
Because
Thank you. Yeah.
the police academy,
Yeah.
no, I'm serious, those people in the previous academy, all, I think to a person, indicated that they would be interested in helping out with things in the city of Mission.
We did.
I think we should concentrate that.
Yeah, my holsters though.
How about don't give him a taser, whatever you choose. Like, give him a taser.
with the taser. I don't
Yeah.
know.
No, I
Hold
can,
it strong. Hold
what
it
I have is a
Yeah.
spreadsheet, and we have 3 shifts for each week, and 2 shifts, 2 people in each shift, so I can just plug people in, and
And
it's
how do
easy
you
to do.
ramp them up so they know what they're doing? and
Well,
how to
our
answer
coordinators
questions?
will get better and better at that, but we're going to have a sheet that kind of talks them through at the table. The early shift folks will be there before the market opens, and, we'll have time with them, and then they can pass the baton. We overlapped the shifts, so we'll be able to say.
We passed out flyers, and it was so exciting. There were 4 people that came up to Mary and me that wanted to participate as vendors. Everybody wanted the sign in their window. I mean, it was really
It's really
fun.
rewarding. I think I see, how you see businesses all the time who say, we're almost to 500 likes on Facebook.
Yeah.
Like us, well, we are at 400 and something. I mean, we're like, it's really fast, 480 or something, 450. So, no, the momentum is undeniable. So I think we'll be good. I think whatever this week looks like, we'll grow from there. We'll know on Saturday.
What's
I think it's
the
good.
forecast look like for Saturday?
Well, when I woke up this morning, that's what I choose to stick with, and that was 82 and partly cloudy, partly sunny, I even think it said, and I'm denying everything
Lock
else.
it in.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, hey, that's when I woke up. So,
Are we all going to meet on Friday night and have like a no rain dance type?
that would be great. I would appreciate whatever you can do.
Ceremony.
Yeah, because that's the only thing, because I think otherwise we'll have throngs of folks coming out. I mean, I'm getting stopped in the halls of the community center and all around, and at other meetings regionally, people have it on their radar too, and I think it's good. So we'll see. So bring wads of cash and support.
Yeah, because the
It's gonna
Costco
be
drummer
really-
is
Yeah.
donations only. Bring dollars and,
Yeah,
That's
sure.
something like I was
The
gonna
bongo.
The bongo guys
Do they
is
have a
donations
structure? How
only.
does
He's
it pay for
just
things?
agreed.
Yeah, each vendor will be specific, so they'll tell you
We want
when
to
you get
come
there.
back.
The
Yeah.
bongo man?
But there's going to be great stuff to buy. I mean, I'm really actually excited to be a customer of the market. So.
And you have 2 food trucks coming
Oh, yeah.
this Saturday, right?
Yeah, Warner's on Wheels will be there, and Sweet Caroline's Shaved Ice will be there at 11. And they have ice cream sandwiches as well as shaved ice. And we'll watch that. Food trucks will have, what we're thinking right now is we'll have 2 slots, and we'll kind of rotate them out and keep those fresh and fun and changing. But we may adjust that as we go.
What are we doing as like the kickoff? Like sometimes just a ribbon cutting or take a little
I was
thing.
just thinking that, and what I thought we would do is, my instinct, I thought about a ribbon cutting too, but we have the sign, and what I'd love is just everybody form the sign and do like a big group picture.
And we get
At
a
what
cowbell.
time?
Yeah.
What time do you
Bring the
everybody
cowbell.
there?
Do you want to start at 6:45 actually?
Yeah.
There's a guy up on
Sure.
Woodson.
But we're kind of doing a soft opening, maybe we should plan for the
That could
bigger
be
opening on the 13th.
the art block weekend, yeah. I haven't thought much about it. I know I want photos of that sign with happy, smiling people around it as soon as possible, but
No,
we
I
can do
mean,
a
I
lot.
think we should think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a guy up on Woodson, just down the street from me, if he still got it, has a tractor and a little wagon thing. And I'm talking about a farm tractor.
Uh-huh.
But, that might be kind of cool just to pull down and have
Yeah.
people
How
on
big
it
is
or
this farm
whatever.
tractor? Does he sit on
I
it?
mean, he takes kids for rides on it.
Oh,
so.
okay, it's a big farm tractor.
Well,
You were kind of doing this, so I'm like, how big is this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a farmer, but.
You're his biggest
You
kid
were
doing it
impressed.
wide though,
Yeah,
aren't
it's
you?
bigger.
If it was a street
lawnmower
sweeper,
I've
you'd be
had.
in.
Street sweeper you'd be sold.
What?
Could the street sweeper pull us in a wagon?
That's a good idea.
I'm telling you.
Thank you.
And you'll get your holster
Great
with your
job,
taser in
great
it.
job.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Ellen.
The last two items on there, I think we can just skip over tonight because we really don't have an update on either one of these plans. We're waiting to get, information back, so.
We will be bringing the
Survey
first round of the
results.
survey results to your July committee meeting.
there we go.
And then the direction finder survey is in production and should be going out. So before we get through the entire budget process, we'll have direction finder results as well.
Okay, do you guys want
Chance we
cake
can take
anybody?
a 2-second or a 2-minute break?
Who made cake?
Or-
Did you,
They did
Amy?
set
Thank you.
a Parks and Recreation
I'm not
Master
sure.
Committee meeting for next week.
So, okay.
There is a knife there.
I kind of cut already, so I think we've got 24, sometimes more than 24 people already. Some of these are kind of big too, so.
Is it half chocolate, half white?
No, it's just, I like lots of frosting and I didn't think there's enough chocolate frosting. So
How many years vacation, Amy?
Huh? I wanted to make cake.
And you didn't want to have it in your house?
Yeah, I'm not taking it home, so it can stay here. I don't know what to do.
No, that's not so. I just need
John, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Oh, my
If
gosh.
you want it to the table, we'll get kicked out of here.
They are free-range eggs, and it's organic, grass-fed butter, and it's olive oil, not canola oil or vegetable oil.
Yeah, that'd be great, I can help you. Let me, you might just grab a chair out there. And then I'll help you get these.
Thanks for making it.
Hey, you're
I'll tell you
welcome.
what,
Yeah.
here's my number.
Martha, how are you?
I'll take photos. Brian, do letter and I'll do books.
These chairs are so
Just sitting here and.
You know, it's funny because everybody's always talking about.
Amy, thank you so much.
I was like, I don't feel very long, and I now.
Thank you.
Yeah, very well.
I just want to give everybody my.
Brian, there's a second letter
How
the
did
other
you do
way.
this? Did you enjoy yourself with this?
You know what?
Yeah.
Let's do it, let's do it.
Oh, right there.
Well, I'm sure you had a
Artist
work
time.
entailed.
It's very.
We don't understand, but I shouldn't believe you guys building a library here.
I was trying to actually find
I'm trying to think.
I put them in the copies we have around.
It's blue, this is the packet. And it's gonna be blue.
I was looking at the other, I was looking at the other.
You're welcome. Do you guys want one, Martha? Or not?
No, is this gluten free?
No.
Yes, I'm gonna eat one, you know?
It's not gluten-free, it's not even dairy-free because it has butter in it.
And it'll make it. And that's A-okay by law.
Yeah, it has
I can
almond
eat it.
milk though. It doesn't-
You do, Jennifer.
My neighbor wants 5 chickens. He says he'll give eggs to
I
everybody.
ran the board for an hour and a half before your meeting, I had a comment.
This one.
They were trying to get a hold of me. You know, call me.
Danielle, I will.
I can write it down.
Hey, Big Dave.
The forks are over there.
Right.
I'm not gonna like it.
Those plates are hard.
I don't know.
I need some napkins.
Probably have to know. right there.
This one right here, this one?
Or that right there.
You want this whole one right here? I'll just do this.
I'm trying to, yeah. You know, 5 minutes.
Do you want that one?
Well, it's not clear on the budget.
Okay. Anybody else?
It's different, I hear new, but it's 20 years of experience. Exactly. I got
No, that's okay.
That's mine. That's yours, your extra? Okay, there's more if anybody wants it.
That's your backup cake.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your finance chair skills and your cake making.
You're gonna do some motion after the
Did you make yours when you were there? I made, because I got it in the notes, and they had me, but it's 26th of May. I'll look and see, I could make it.
I tried to figure out certain
I thought I did make it when you, I thought I did too. Did you get it? I'll call them.
Well, we only have one.
So, 6:32, we'll go ahead and call this.
Oh, sorry.
7:32. Now it's into order.
Figure out what
I can't, is that in October?
And you want to go?
Yeah, I do. When is it in November?
I'll send you them.
All right, so we called it into order. First item on our agenda is acceptance of the 2014 audit.
Yes, thank you, and I'm going to immediately turn this over. We have Jonathan Nybarger with Mike Hauser, who's here. He was the, I don't know the technical terminology, but he was our lead auditor on our 2014 audit. He's worked on our account for several years now, but I'm going to turn him over to kind of run through the highlights of that audit process. We are required legally each year to hire an outside independent audit firm to take a look at that, and so let him kind of share some of that with you, and he and I are available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you for having me. I'm here to briefly go over the audit with you, and then, as Laura said, we can answer any questions that you may have. Starting off in the financial statement book, pages 1 and 2 are the auditor's report. And the auditor's report includes standards that we use for the audit, and most importantly, the opinion that we issued. You can find the opinion on the second page in the first paragraph, and we issued an unmodified opinion, which is the best opinion that the city can receive. And briefly, I wanted to skip back to the page directly before the auditor's report. It's the 2013 Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. It is awarded by the Government Finance Officers Association. And I feel like both the certificate and the unmodified opinion speak very highly on the financial management of the city. Moving on is the...
Congratulations.
What number a year getting this award?
I think it's our 21st.
So,
You are in agreement.
Yes.
Better finance.
no pressure. You have some big shoes to fill. Sorry, look at us looking all around. I was lost.
The next few pages, or next section, is the management discussion and analysis, and that's on pages 3 through 8. The couple pages to kind of highlight there is page 4, which kind of provides a brief summary of the change in net position from last year to this year for the city, which you can see that it increased by about $4 million in 2014. And then next on page 6 is a breakdown of the revenues and expenses for this change. And the main increase was due to increased sales tax and grants that the city received in 2014. From the next section is the statement of net position, which then shows the assets and liabilities for the city. And the following page is the statement of activities, which is the revenues and expenses for the city in more detail than what's shown in the management discussion and analysis pages. From here, the funds, you start to break out and see more detail for each fund. Next is the governmental activities section, which lists the major funds for the city. For each fund, there's a GAAP basis page and a reconciliation to the budgetary basis. and a comparison from the budgetary basis to what was budgeted in 2014, and it shows the variance for each account. Next is the notes to the financial statements, and those are on pages 19 to 36. The notes include information over the city's accounting policies, employee benefits, capital assets, and long-term debt information. And one of the areas that people are usually interested in is capital assets, which can be found on page 28. And these increased due to the projects for the Aquatic Center and the Johnson Drive improvement projects that were completed in process during the year. And on the following page is the long-term debt, which is listed by issue, and you can see that it includes the 2014 two bond refundings that were done. And also in there is the amortization over the life of the bonds for repayment by year. And overall, debt decreased due to scheduled payoff of the bonds. Then the next section is the non-major funds, which are just the less material funds for the city. These also have a breakdown, just like the governmental activity funds, the major funds that show the budgetary basis and a reconciliation back to the GAAP basis of the county, as well as a comparison from the budgetary basis to the budgeted amounts. And then the next section is the statistical section, which begins on page 47. And this part is pretty interesting because it shows the history of the city over the past 10 years on various schedules. And then outside of the financial statements, we issued a letter on auditors' recommendations to management. It's a separate letter that is outside of the book. And these are just a few areas where we thought the city could use some improvements over internal controls and accounting policies. But I wanted to stress that we don't consider these to be deficiencies for the city, merely areas where the city could use some improvement. And the other letter is a standard letter that we issue every year, which is just the auditor's communication letter. Overall, we greatly appreciated the assistance and cooperation of the city staff and Laura for the audit. They were extremely helpful, and it seems like they do a great job for the city. Thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions you may have with the financial statements of the audit.
Well, it's not just that they seem to do a good job. Yeah. They do an outstanding job. I did want to take just 1 minute on page 28, and this is more for anybody who's new. I always think this is an important page that gets glossed over because we certainly talk a lot about the money we spend and the debt that we have had to incur as a result of that investment. But this will show you, especially if you just take the total capital assets and not drop down to the net, it'll show you that as of December 13, total capital assets in the city were over 75 million, and end of 14 were close to 84 million. I don't know if we were to go back to 2000, 10 years prior to this. I couldn't even begin to fathom for you what that number was, but all I can say is significantly less. And so the investments that we have made, we're leaving our community in a better place the more investments that we make because our capital assets continue to increase.
And what exactly do these capital assets represent? Because obviously this is Johnson Drive.
Right, so there's some good detail on page 28 that will kind of talk about whether it's buildings.
I'm reading page 28.
I'm sorry?
I'm reading page 28, and I'm trying to figure out what the 7.7 million addition is.
The main part of that was the Aquatic Center that was under construction, and then also the Johnson Drive projects. Okay. And then the part that decreased on the construction in progress was the Martway project, and that gets reflected as being moved out of the construction in progress account since it was completed during the year, and it's moved to a full asset in total under infrastructure for the same amount.
Okay, thank you.
It was very straightforward. It was easy to read. I really liked that.
Well, we also appreciate, my father, in their former lives as Lowenthal, Singleton, Webb, and Wilson have worked with us for a number of years, but part of their best practices requires that they rotate. We have different lead auditors, and and different staff, so we do have fresh eyes, but it's also been a tremendous benefit as we've worked through some very complicated projects that occur over multiple years. So not only do they come in, they're a fantastic resource throughout the year for us as we look at best practices. How do we want to set things up so that when we get to the end of the year and we're going through the audit, it's going to be clear for all of us and easy to communicate and to track. And they're very available to us through that process. And I have to say also, because of our size, sometimes we do have some limitations on internal controls because we just don't have enough people to create all of the separation that we would like to. And they're very good at suggesting feasible, reasonable ways that help us protect that, but are manageable and meaningful for an organization our size as well.
I thought that was really nice, even though you got an excellence again, that they did give you some feedback, and I mean, you can always improve. It's nice to have that input.
Right.
As a city, strive for more excellence, huh?
So I hate to ask this question, but since it was stated, were any of these incorrectly calculated to the negative of the licensee?
Which issue in the management letter are you talking about?
Number one. The business licenses were incorrectly calculated.
I would have to go back and look.
I just wondered if we owe some people some money.
No, it works in the opposite direction.
Unfortunately, I'm glad instead
Yes.
of having to
Yes.
give them money back, I'd rather
Yeah.
err on that side.
And so there have been, one of the things that we've been working on through tightening up our application is, do we rely on the business to tell us their square footage? Do we use the county's records? And a variety of different things. So as that has evolved over time, we've sort of fleshed out, and I think it's a handful, I mean, it's less than 10, I think, that we've identified, right, where we have a discrepancy in that square footage. And, we need to kind of come back and look and see what that means. But in no case, I mean, it's underpayment as opposed to.
Is our new software helping?
We don't have it yet.
We don't have it yet? Oh.
We shifted that, right? We shifted some things around
All right. And as Brian said to me this afternoon, I said, I don't know if you saw that management letter, and his response to me was, I'm on it. We are glad that for many reasons that he's here. So anyway.
So this year.
Right.
Yes.
All right.
Tomorrow.
Auditors are probably appreciating.
What is it? You've been here 5 weeks and you already have nicknamed governmentor.
Governor.
Governator.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. It doesn't take long to develop a
Yeah.
dislike for that system. So, anyway, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Will we not
Very
meet you
nice.
next year? We had you last year, right?
I don't know where you are in the rotation.
Right, I think as long as you're planning on having us back as auditors, I plan to be the main auditor back.
Okay, got it.
Wait, are you 3? Do you have to switch out every 3 years?
Um,
I never can remember your cycle.
That's kind of, we leave that somewhat up to the client. If you guys feel that you want more of a more frequent rotation, we can make that work. Some clients kind of like to stick with the same auditor for a little bit to increase some efficiencies as well. So we can kind of leave that up to you guys on that end. There's no set standard that we have for that.
We just learned everybody else's names this year, so we might keep.
Yeah. Some familiarity would be good.
Yes.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you.
Appreciate you coming out tonight. Your Wednesday
Here. It's in your packet as well, electronically, but there. So, you're happy to have mine. And then-
Oh, I'm okay, thank you.
All right, second on our agenda is ordinance redistricting mission ward boundary.
Okay, so at the May meeting, we completed our second public hearing on the ward redistricting, and didn't have quite the turnout this go around as we've had in the past. So we are now ready to move forward to actually take action on the ordinance, which would adopt the revised boundaries for Ward 1 and Ward 2. The draft ordinance was included in your packet, so the process following that, council consideration, assuming that that would be adopted, would be provided to the election board. And then that process would move forward and the new boundaries would be in effect for the next election cycle.
I just think this is great that we found a solution that obviously the citizens in the city feel comfortable with. So I think it's a great job by everybody, and I'm glad it's kind of a non-issue.
You want to bring this, you want
So we
to
wanna take it?
take it, yeah, do you want to talk about it a little bit
Yeah.
to people?
Yeah, I don't think we have to
Yeah,
put
kind of.
consent.
Right.
That's what you mean. Okay.
I'm sorry, you said not consent?
And
And
then
someone
we'll-
recommend that, someone recommend the audit.
I'll
to go-
recommend, I'll recommend.
I'll recommend on second.
Next we have the amendment to cooperative agreement with Johnson County for the CDBG and Home Investment Partnerships Program.
So we have had a cooperative agreement with Johnson County for several years to allow us to access community development block grant fund an entitlement city. So this is one of the ways that we can have access to those kinds of funds. We have not applied for, nor do we have anything currently identified that we would be using CDBG or home funds for. This agreement that we've had in place since 2003 automatically renews, but recently changes in the federal law require a provision in the agreement language that says if we were to apply and be awarded those funds, we couldn't turn around and give those funds to other jurisdictions. So
Other jurisdictions?
cities or, which I can't imagine if we made applications for that, that we would be doing that, but, so there's no harm in doing this.
Unless somebody has.
We would recommend, CDBG funds, I will tell you, CDBG funds are, you have to qualify by income requirements within specific census tracts, so it can be very difficult sometimes to find projects that would qualify. The home program, we had participated in several years ago. We quite honestly felt as if that as much of our dollars were going to administration as we're actually going into projects in mission, and that's when the council kind of pulled back those dollars and created the Mission Possible program and a lot of our own assistance programs, and we feel like for the same level of investment, it had a more direct impact. So again, I don't see us necessarily applying for these funds, but it gives us the flexibility to do so in the future.
Give us an example of what possibly a reason we would apply for this. I mean, I get it's hypothetical, but what?
I think the last time we actually applied for CDBG funds, we used them as part, we were doing a street project, sidewalk project in an area where there were some census tracts that qualified, and so we actually were able to secure some CDBG dollars to apply toward the construction.
So what about sidewalks? I mean, because we've heard from people that people want sidewalks. Is there something we can do there?
It may be, and so part of what we'll want to do is look at, we put this in place, and then as we look at it on a case-by-case basis, and we're going out and saying, that may be another pot of funds where we can go, if we've got projects that line up with census tracts that would qualify. So,
And are we considering creating projects or recommending projects because of this that we wouldn't have otherwise considered?
no, I think we generally know that resource is available to us, so as we evaluate the funding sources that might be available, this
Or
is
potential projects that could come on our radar, we're taking this into consideration.
Can I recommend consent?
Yeah, works for me.
Aye.
We're not voting.
So next we have the surplus property resolution.
Can we talk about this in detail?
Yeah, Brian would love to. He's committed all the serial numbers on those listing vests to memory, right?
That's right. You know, the floors of
This is
that.
pretty heated discussion we have in regards to this.
Well, I've heard, yeah. So I understand this is a quarterly report that we present to you on surplus property that we're planning to sell.
I think Pat wants the ballistic vest. Sorry, Pat. you can't.
Quarterly report that comes up every month. I'm just kidding, no.
I was thinking
I
quarterly.
recommend take this to council on consent.
Take it.
Take it.
Sorry.
Take it.
Stole all this time. It was
I
exciting.
know, sorry.
Next we have
I believe next year will be an election year because right
You're
now,
up,
it
girl.
would not become effective
You're
until
up.
January 1st of 17. So again, there are a lot of things that the implementation of all of this has yet to be decided. But right now, it looks like municipal primary elections would move to August of odd-numbered years, and the general would move to November of odd-numbered years. Would not be partisan. Whether or not the elections were partisan would be left up to each individual municipality. And there's an opportunity to have elections in even-numbered years if you are trying to stagger terms or have 3-year terms. So there are a lot of things that we're going to want to consider once this bill actually gets signed into law, and we'll bring back.
It's already passed the Kansas House.
It's not that, yes.
Okay.
I don't know, they keep.
The House and the Senate?
It's pending signature by the
It's pending
governor,
signature by
yes.
the governor right now, yes.
Okay.
So is the scenario that all April 16 elections would get pushed to November 17?
Or November 16.
No, I don't believe so,
No
because if it
changes
doesn't
at all for
become
16.
effective until January 1st of 17, technically we would still be on track to have a 16 election.
So would
Yes.
those be abbreviated or extended terms?
Those, we would need to change our ordinance, I would guess, that's part of what we're gonna have to look at. We would have to change our
Because at
ordinance.
some point, we're gonna either have to catch up some way, if it's gonna be November of,
It'd be an awfully abbreviated
Yes.
term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
might as well extend it, make
I would
it
think
5
extended
instead of
would be
4.
good.
well,
So-
that'll be lively.
Yes, we'll look at, when some of the dust settles, we'll bring all of that back, and we will have time to evaluate all of that.
Well, we have a state budget by then.
That's
So
a good
it's
question.
no longer, it's still nonpartisan, it's up to the city to determine potentially if it's partisan or not. And then we could still have elections every 2 years, just odd number of years.
And they did not limit or restrict your ability to hold bond or sales tax elections, which was a very positive outcome of that. So, stay tuned. We'll keep you updated on that. But it does mean we are one of the few cities that is off cycle with odd numbered years. I mean, if you think about it, most of our member communities have elections in odd numbered years currently. So while there's some extension from April to November, they're not the same issues that we're going to have to sort of unravel and put back together.
But just to clarify, there's no threat to a term that would expire April of 16, that term would be extended.
Not the way we are interpreting the legislation currently.
What
It says
did you
effective
say?
date
What
of
was it?
January 1st, 2017.
Okay.
It's just all elections from that point.
Okay.
Yes.
Except in your case.
So if you signed up for 4 years.
You've got 4 years.
All right, I'm just checking.
Okay.
All right, general fund budget.
Well, no, hold on, I mean, if you're late elected in 16,
Well, then you may have
you're
a
either
5.5
gonna
term.
be,
Yeah,
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 you're doing
term.
5 years or 3.
Or, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
But I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for 4. That's why I was trying to clarify.
Oh, just let me know, you know you're in for 7 years.
Like prison term.
Furloughed for good behavior.
All right, general fund budget.
Okay. Tonight is our first pass at the 2016 general fund budget. So let me get right pages. Everybody should have received some additional information yesterday. We appreciate that we had some department heads that were out last week, and we did not want to send kind of a statement about capital needs totaling over $1 million without having an opportunity to review that as a management team together, which we were able to do. So Brian has been buried in the budget, is probably a fair assessment, jumped right into the budget in the 5 weeks that he's been here, so it's has got a great understanding of that so far, so I'm going to let him chime in as well. But kind of starting at the top, if you will, there was a revised page which actually added some money on the revenue side that was included with your packet yesterday in terms of the general fund balance. So that's the sheet I'm going to be working from. If you're looking at the bottom for proposed 16, it shows an ending fund balance of $2,710,456. So that's the sheet I'm going to be speaking from.
The one you sent us?
The one I sent yesterday, yes.
And you're talking about the last page?
Yep, so that, just so that number, and then I will tell you the number that changed there was we increased the property tax revenues to match with the 15 collections. We happened to get our second half distribution from the state the first of this week, so kind of caught up with some of those numbers and felt confident with that. So that was the only number that changed and what impacted the bottom line there. So if you look at it on the revenue side, again, our major revenue streams continue to be property tax, city sales, or sales and use tax in general, both city and county, franchise taxes, police fines, and community center revenues. So while we're seeing some fluctuation and some movement among those categories, some go up, some go down. You don't really have any one of those major revenue streams that is keeping up with inflation and cost of delivering the services that we offer to our residents. The best news that we have as we start the 2016 general fund budget is the ending position, our ending fund balance position in 2014. And we've talked about this in our previous budget discussions, but that was firmed up with the audit that you saw tonight, and that number is now firm and final. If you go back to last year's budget, we expected that we were going to end 2014 with a fund balance of about $1.5 million. And we ended the year with $2.4 million, adding $950,000 to that fund balance. We talked about that was a combination, and you'll see it in the numbers reflected above. You'll see a spike in city sales and use taxes, and that was due to, we believe, equipment that was purchased by AT&T. So kind of a one-time anomaly that we can't count on going forward, as well as just some significant salary savings and some other things on the expenditure side. So there was a benefit on the revenue side and savings on the expenditure side that contributed to that $950,000 operating surplus at the end of 2014. What that does is gets us leaps and bounds. We've been adding to and rebuilding fund balance since 2010 when we had our intentional spend down to restructure stormwater debt, working back towards that 25% fund balance policy in the general fund. And we've been adding $60,000 to $100,000 a year to get there, which is good progress, but slow progress. So being able to close that gap in this year is a very positive start, and I think takes some pressures off of some of the other competing goals that we've had in the general fund. And we'll talk about that as we go forward, about how we want to maintain that, and we want to continue probably that forward progress. But we still have some balancing to do, as you will see. So revenues in 2014 were at $10.7 million. You'll see that expected in 15 and our proposed for 16 are back down really more in the 10.3 range. We think that's realistic.
So I'm sorry, where are you? I really am not tracking with you at all. So
Right.
where are you at?
Total
10
revenues.
point whatever?
So total revenues about midway down the page.
Okay. When you said 10.3, I'm looking for percentages over here.
Oh, no, sorry, $10.3 million.
Okay.
10.285 in 15 and 10.354 in 2016.
So can I go back and ask questions just since I wasn't tracking?
Mhm.
I'm sorry. So again, going back to the use taxes, the reason there's a decrease of 2 to 3% or around 3% is because we had that unexpected bump from the AT&T property purchases, and that's why it's going down in 2016 projected.
So I think
I'm confused because we didn't budget that. So that's a decrease from an actual.
so. If you look at the actual 14 in the county sales and use taxes, where you're seeing those decreases.
So wait a minute. So I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. So actual is just actual, and that's just a number. This percent change is from what we budgeted in 2015, which we don't have any actuals for 2015 yet, and what we're proposing for 2016.
Yes.
So why do we believe there's gonna be a decrease in use tax from what we budgeted in 15 to 16? And I get it's just 3%, I totally get it, I'm sorry I'm asking this question, but I want to understand.
And it's because we take a really conservative approach on the revenues. So typically what happens is I would guess if we added a 13 actual column, you're going to see numbers in the county sales and use tax columns that reflect the 2015 budget a little bit more closely. So we're kind of looking at and saying we're going to account for that trend that we see now that we have the 2014 actuals, and we may overshoot it a little bit in 15. We didn't revise the 15 budget to the estimated numbers. So we're looking at that actual trend, and we're looking at kind of year-to-date trend, although we really only have about 3 months under our belt that we can forecast from, to just say, let's be conservative. If we do better, we do better. And that helps our bottom line at the end of the year. But at this point, when we're trying to get to a balanced budget, and we want to be as conservative as we can be.
And why do you think there's an 8% increase in city sales and use tax if there's a county sales and use tax decrease?
Because we're seeing that kind of trend in our city receipts. So the trend on both sides is going to be a little bit different. We're just getting a percentage of the county sales.
Right, but sales tax is sales taxes, and all sales tax consists of city and county. So if we're trending up, we should be trending up on both. If we're trending down, we should be trending down.
Yeah, I don't understand it either, but look at the county's actually trending down for the last few months.
Oh, interesting.
And the city's going up, yeah.
It's the place to be, baby.
Yeah.
Investment brings in money.
In the stormwater fund.
Is that because
which we
there's
look at
people
in
who
capital.
don't have to pay county tax?
But they have to
do
pay
pay the
city?
city tax?
It's a really convoluted formula
Yeah.
that the county applies to how they distribute the percentage of the county sales tax that then comes back to the city.
Math.
So we can, I
don't need
have
a
my budget
complicated
book.
formula.
Yeah.
So now, you probably talked about this while I was confused, but the TIF, why do we have a 41% decrease from 15 budget to 16? What did,
Well, the simple answer to that is because the county didn't actually, even though we had provided and certified the TIF district to them, that Mission Crossing TIF was established in 2010, was the base year of that TIF. And it got lost in the shuffle.
No, we
of the
got it.
county.
Yeah, the county finally caught up with remitting the return to the increment on the
so
TIF
in
district.
15, so we're gonna bear that this year.
We got a big fat check about a week before I showed up from the county that basically represented last year and half of this year. So
Yes.
it all goes to
Okay, I'm glad we
development,
didn't, I'm glad we
fortunately.
didn't. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so now, I'm sorry, now I'm going back down through here. Gonna make a statement, it's probably gonna be unpopular, but, I personally want to see our police ensuring our city is safe. I live on Lamar. I cannot tell you how many of my neighbors
That's a
continue.
very controversial statement. I don't
It was.
agree with that. I mean, see,
I agree
that's
with
gonna
that.
upset a lot of people.
She hasn't finished.
You wait a second.
However,
National police to keep us safe. However,
I do not go out into my yard at 1 week where somebody of my neighbors is not complaining about how fast people drive on Johnson Drive or Lamar. So people
Like
are
reckless or
Lamar,
speeding or combination?
speeding down Lamar, speeding really. I mean, I think I even have a neighbor who told the sheriff that he was going to like take some kind of action because people are at 6:30 in the morning driving down Lamar way too fast. So I get we want to be careful what kind of fines and tickets we're giving, but I think speeding is really something we should, I don't know. I get where we were, where we're going through and we're learning, but I would be okay with seeing 1350 in this 2016 number again, but because I would assume we're not having fewer people coming into our city. If anything, we're having more people come into our city with all the development that's been done with natural grocers. See, I told you I was going to get to the controversial part. Jason knew. He was just wait for it.
I heard you say that development by the city or investment by the city brings more people into it. That's what
I think I
heard.
said development in the city.
Gotcha. But I thought you said Johnson Drive, along with natural grocers.
And Dave, I do not discount what the development of Johnson Drive has done to the city. I will go to my grave believing that the cosmetic that you see could have been done and achieved with a much less investment with the stormwater interceptor. That's where I will go till the day I die, and that's where I stand. But
Well, I understand.
you can make the top really pretty, and you didn't have to put the big, huge thing on the bottom. Has nothing to do with one, does not have anything to do with the other. So anyhow, so that's my opinion on it. And pool revenues we're seeing go down because the fun sexiness of the pool we think is going to wear off a little.
Pool revenues actually are going up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong line. Is it miscellaneous and others? It's going down 20%.
Yep.
Sorry. And what's that?
It's just miscellaneous.
And others.
Right, we had, I'd have to go back and look.
That I just would be interested.
We had a reimbursement of an expense, and I'll have to go back and look at that. I have it jotted down somewhere that in 2014 then. So that number is all over the board in any given year. So on average, when we look at a 5-year history, we're closer to that $100,000 range. That's one of those categories where if we budget conservatively and then we do better.
What have you?
Yes. So miscellaneous and other, actually, part of that is sale of fixed assets. And so when we have things to sell, vehicles to sell in a given year, you can see tens of thousands of dollars of swings in that line item.
So thank you for giving some detail. I absolutely don't want to discount everybody's hard work, and I really appreciate the fact that we are continuing to decrease expenditures and being conservative on revenues as always. So, but thank you for calling out for this.
And I think to go back to police fines, so we have an ongoing conversation, the chief and I, I think, again, if we look at, and I know some of the things that he shared with you all recently, so traffic stops are actually up. We're up in 2014.
But stops is different than actual.
Right, but we're still doing stops, and so I think, the message is, and I think the message that he's sending to his officers is, traffic safety continues to be a high priority in the community, and so.
Chief, what were the figures on, like,
We stopped 1,000 more cars last year than we did the year before. We just wrote about 500 fewer tickets.
How about injuries, accidents?
Accident rate was pretty even.
Actually, we came down a little bit when we look at the annual report statistics, the accident rate.
Awesome.
We usually have about 250 accidents a year.
Really?
But we just hired one officer that starts field training in 2 weeks, and we're still short one more person. So when you're not fully staffed, that cuts into, I gotta have officers driving your districts before we put people out doing traffic enforcement. Yeah, patrol officers do traffic enforcement too, but as I've explained to the city staff before, that the number of disturbances that we've had this year have gone up 30%. Instead of going to 65 calls a month, we're going to 90 to 100. And all of these other calls that we go to takes us away from doing traffic enforcement and foot patrols and stuff like that, so.
What are those injuries?
Now, why do you?
Mild winter.
Really?
It wasn't that cold, didn't get a lot of snow.
So
People were feeling a little frisky.
And people
They weren't
call
staying
sometimes,
inside,
and we have a lot of apartments, sometimes people call, sometimes they don't.
Ah.
So the word gets out, hey, we want you guys calling, and we get more calls. So the more calls for service we have, the less time we have to drive.
Interesting.
Your neighborhoods.
So those are the kinds of pieces of data that we want to capture and hang on to and make part of the conversation. So we're looking at calls for service, we're looking at length of time spent on a call. So if we're spending, 2 years ago we were spending 20 minutes on a call, and now our average call is 40 minutes. That impacts the availability of our officers. There are lots of moving parts and pieces, accident rates, traffic safety. staffing levels, all of those kinds of things that will play into that number. So again, we were looking at actuals for 2014, and again, if that's a category where we do better, we know we're doing better because there's a need for, the traffic and speeding is driving that.
Yeah, I would say that I think it was 28% of the tickets that we wrote last year were for speeding. So about a fourth one.
So this general fund budget, and I think I mentioned in the memo, but at this point, this holds the mill levy constant. So at this point, all of the mills that are being assessed by mission are being assessed relative to the general fund, and that was about 11.354 mills in total. You'll remember that in the 15 budget, we brought the mill over that was being assessed to pay the debt service for Mohawk Park into the general fund. So total city mill levy remained the same, and we added that little boost into the general fund because the Mohawk debt service was paid off in 2014. So then when we move into the expenditure side, we did provide you in the packet kind of the first pass of the line item detail for the departments. But we're looking at about a 2.79 decrease overall from the 2015 budget. Now, understand that that is exclusive of capital, so that's a little bit of an artificial decrease because we know that we do have capital needs that need to be incorporated into the 16 budget. And as we talked about, they are actually approaching and exceeding $900,000, and were outlined in that supplemental memo that came yesterday. So other assumptions that are built into this base budget, as you see presented for 2016, is a continuation of the subsidy of a portion of the residential solid waste contract for single-family property owners. We do not yet have the contract renewal from Deaf and Baugh. I expect that to be coming in the next week or two. In talking with our former contact about 2 weeks ago, Unified Government, other cities are seeing about 1.5–2% increase, so I don't expect it to be excessive.
Were there any changes in services?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
What was the increase from year-over-year before? It was pretty good, like 3%.
Yeah, it was less than that actually. I think it was very small last year.
Was it the year before? I know we had I don't know, like 3% to me is kind of a big jump, but.
Well, I was remembering too that I thought we had locked in the Deaf and Baugh contract right before Mike departed.
We did.
But it has a escalate. There's a automatic. There's a range within which they can increase it.
On an annual basis or every 3 years?
Annual basis.
Annual
yeah.
basis.
I thought on a 3 year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but within that range, within the term of that contract, the services that they provide can't be impacted.
Right.
And what is the pricing on that?
You actually renewed it and extended it. No, it went 7. It went 7 years.
I was thinking there was a big number in there.
There was a big number in the last time that we renewed it. I think it went 7 years. Typically, we look at it at 4-year.
Okay.
And we locked that in at 7 years. You obviously have the ability to impact that on an annual basis. I will tell you, we've been approached by some of the other neighboring communities who a couple of years ago did that joint RFP for solid waste services, and asking if we would have an interest in that. I think that's not up for rebid until next year.
Did it help them?
Well, the bigger, they realized some, I think.
But we didn't participate.
We didn't participate at that point. Quite frankly, our services and our price was better.
It's better, and then we get the recycling to get money back.
Right, and so, I think it's worth looking at that. As we know, Deaf and Baugh was purchased by Waste Management. There are a lot of changes that are happening at Deaf and Baugh right now, and I'm going to be really interested to see how that impacts our contract in the long term. So it's certainly an option that we will keep that conversation going with the neighboring communities. But I think my impression is that we don't want to decrease the level of service that we're providing to the residents in terms of bulky item collection, recycling, yard waste, and trash.
I would like to see on bulky item that recycling, if I have a box, a big box, that they will take my big box instead of me having to chop it into 2x2
foot pieces.
Well, you can't just collapse it.
If it's a big, heavy box,
Give your
then
recycle guy.
I'll come over and
Christmas
step on it
tip,
for you.
And he'll take care of you.
The other thing that we did in 2015 with the increase, the city absorbed.
Right, thank you.
The city absorbed all of the increase. We didn't pass any of the increase. We didn't share proportionately in the contractual increase with the residents. So once we get that number, we'll break that down and we'll bring that option back to you as well. Do you want to do that or do you not want to do that? So for the time being, we basically left the same level of subsidy at about $85,000 in the 2016 base budget.
So would we not, we're not gonna pass on an increase to residents either?
She's saying that we're gonna reconsider.
I'll bring, and I didn't want to
Okay,
bring
thank
you
you.
numbers that weren't real, but
Yeah.
when you
Okay.
get it, and depending on how much it is, we'll break that down.
Yeah.
And show you, and you can make
What
that
percent-
decision.
I'm sorry, what percentage is the subsidy now that we provide?
No, we're paying about we're paying
Isn't it like 75%, something like that?
Yeah.
no, they're paying closer to 74%.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
We're only
paying,
paying a quarter. Oh.
And that represents in real dollars, 85,000. Okay.
yep. This base budget before you also currently includes maintenance of our franchise and mill rate rebate program at 100% of the franchise taxes, 75% of our total city mill, excluding special assessments, which is solid waste utility, or no, that's transportation utility, stormwater utility. So they don't get a rebate on that, and then 50% rebate of their solid waste utility fee. So in this budget, the current rebate program costs are budgeted at about $14,000. That's a little bit of a decrease. We've made some modifications to the income qualification guidelines over the last couple of years, and we've seen that come down just a little bit. Obviously, it's open. That program is open year-round. So if we have more people apply, we might spend a little bit more than that. But personnel costs that are included in the budget reflect the possibility for up to a 3% merit pool, and roughly about a 5% increase in health and welfare costs. Again, we won't have those numbers until mid-October, early November. So we have to, we try to provide flexibility so we don't have to come back to you in October and November and say, we've seen a really significant increase. We're not been able to manage those costs very well.
What's our current staff?
Employer split 80-20. So
No, what's our current staff? Are we fully staffed right now? Are we lapsing FTE? Where are we on total staff right now?
we are.
I got you, that's what I'm saying, you're dropping FTE on me.
We are not fully staffed. When the 15 budget was adopted, it included holding some positions, a position in Public Works that's still being held. We are also down a position in Public Works. We're actively trying to fill that one position.
But we have a half year of that we haven't been paying.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the police department had a position that they held for 6 months, and you're in the process of recruiting, but we're going to go a little bit longer, right? So we are looking, where we will be looking primarily over the next 12 to 18 months is the community center, as they have position vacancies, because that's where we have to do some very serious evaluation as we look at getting them to the cost recovery goals that were established. A big part of anybody's budget.
Are we over right now on number of employees at the community center?
What do you mean over?
Based on what
your budget
project for the number needed for the services provided.
I don't know that there's a good straight. I mean, we haven't changed the number of positions at the community center for probably 6 or 7 years in the budget. So we are at that number. What we have to do is evaluate. Part of what we are continuing to do is say, is that the right number of positions to provide the services?
Will the Parks Master Plan address that?
The Parks Master Plan won't really address that. It's going to just be continued work by staff on looking at benchmarking and cost recovery for other facilities and service delivery approaches and some of those kinds of things.
Well, I think you've done, Parks and Rec has done an excellent job in looking at how many opportunities we have for part-time employment versus full-time, where benefit changes and things like that are looked at, so we really appreciate that.
And then this budget includes some steps. They're still a little blurry around the edges in some cases because there's a lot of data and a lot of information to go out and collect. I think we've started identifying, obviously you kind of first go to your big expenditure areas, so that's personnel, some of those kinds of things, and we look at opportunities to get better there. One of Brian's comments has been, as we've gone through this budget process, is there's not a lot left to cut here. And so, you go to kind of your traditional, we can probably save a few dollars here. And we've consistently done that year after year after year. And so it becomes, more and more difficult to do that. So right now, as this budget stands, we're not at 90% cost recovery. We're at 87%. And we're going to continue to work on those things. But we will certainly keep you all in the loop of that. And we also heard your message loud and clear that it's a good goal. If it takes us a little bit longer to get there, I think I understood generally you to be supportive of that.
Yes.
Quadruple fees, I think is what we said.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what Dave said. Where's
Gold. See, I wait till Dan comes. I sit here.
So we're still.
Gold's Gym, right? Is that what it's going to be called? Gold's Gym.
No, it's going to be called Planet Fitness.
Sylvester Community Center, Gold's Gym. That's how we're going to get there?
Yes.
All right, I'm just making sure.
Yep.
So I just have to say that it's nice that our equipment gets released and replaced because the gym I frequent does not do that. And
There's two problems with that statement.
I know,
but
I
The gym I frequent?
Wrong place.
Yeah. Whoa.
Wrong place.
Oops.
We are still lapsing on Martin's position, correct?
Well, we aren't technically lapsing. It's current, yes, it is still vacant. So we just really aren't as formal.
That sounds
I
more
know.
like a statement
We just
on
aren't
Martin.
as
That's right.
We it turns out
we
we
aren't
never
as formal as the federal
our
government. So, the reality is that we're so small that we lapse every position when it comes vacant because we have to kind of step back and say, what are our needs? Where do we need the people? Where do we need the expertise? And we need as much flexibility as we can have. But yes, our intent is still to fill that position in community development.
Sometime, because the way you perform in so many different areas, in so many arenas of expertise, you guys make it real hard when you come back with something because you've managed without for so long.
We understand that very well sometimes, yes. But I appreciate you saying that. Which is why, in part, you're going to see a capital supplemental list that has $900,000 worth of information on it. I think these are things, so let's just jump right in there. So if we go back to this summary page and we say, okay, what we've heard you say to us over the years is try to manage your expenditures. Please bring us a budget where the total expenditures are less than the total revenues, less than or equal to the total revenues. So don't be dipping into fund balance. I will tell you in the next few budget work sessions, I'm going to specifically challenge some of our conversations around that, only because we took a $950,000 leap in 1 year, and I don't want us to continue to add to a backlog of capital needs. I want us to have a very specific conversation around that. So recognizing that fund balance is very important to me, very important to you, very important to this community. Just understand I want to raise some of those discussion points because we find ourselves in a position that we didn't expect to be in. And I want to take advantage of that in the smartest way possible. So looking at the budget as presented, where we would be ending and where our fund balance would need to be, which is 25% of annual operating revenues. Right. We have about a $302,000 operating surplus. So without considering anything else, the question would be then, how do we fit in $302,000 worth of the needs that are included on these other sheets?
And what is everybody's number one priorities total?
So if you look at everybody's number one priorities, and part of this is
or the non-rated ones that are the sooner ones.
So we really only assign the priorities to the equipment that's going to be functional within the department. So I look at police, but I look at if we bought all of those vehicles outright, we have leased the frontline vehicles in the past. So if you could bring that number, if you want to continue leasing that, you could bring that number one priority probably closer to the $90,000 a year range.
And why would we recommend changing it from that to this?
Two reasons. You want to definitely keep your frontline vehicles on no more than a 4-year replacement cycle. Those are the ones that are on the street being run all the time.
And are they're currently leased?
They are currently leased. And you end up doing 5 or 6 vehicles in that replacement every time you're on that cycle. Okay, the other vehicles, we leased vehicles in 14 because we were playing catch up. We were replacing some vehicles that were 2001s, 2004s, 2005. So we got behind in our capital replacement as a result of trying to balance all the other budget priorities. So some things were deferred, and in some cases it was because they weren't maintenance problems that we were able to. They didn't need to be replaced in that particular year. I think the conversation that we've had, we would like to move away from as many leases. I think leases are appropriate in some instances, but and maybe appropriate in the frontline patrol vehicle replacement cycle. But then trying to get the other police department and other department equipment on a cycle where we can afford to purchase that. So the other thing that leases do is then help level out your peaks and valleys. So as opposed to $300,000 a year, you're probably going to be looking at $100,000 a year to keep your frontline vehicles on the replacement schedule that you want.
Versus something less, like $50,000, and then $500,000 because we have to replace everything.
Right.
So we
That's
have
a
to be
difference
saving.
this year. We've been paying $100,000 on the last lease for the frontline Tahoes. If you don't want to continue to lease them, you're gonna pay $305,500 in 16 to do that replacement, as opposed to $100,000 on a lease.
Right, and then, so now we have to be diligent in off years to save up the money to make sure we have it when we're doing these big purchases. And then what happens from a depreciation perspective? I'm not familiar with my accounting enough to remember. Is depreciation better, more advantageous from a lease perspective? Is it non-existent from a lease perspective, and then it is existent when you own it outright?
We probably don't get appreciated, do
Not to actually gain possession of it at the end of the lease.
Right, so it would be no depreciation at all for a lease, and then we would be able to depreciate the vehicles that we owned outright.
Right.
The equipment we owned outright, so what's the savings there? I mean, yeah, so those are just kind of the things that go through my mind, like, from a long-term financial perspective, from the amount of use we have on these vehicles, what's the long-term comparison? And I don't know if the long-term comparison is over 4 years, if it's over 5 years, if it's over 10 years, I don't know. And then you now have to, it just makes me nervous that you now have to be diligent about, so when you sit down as a personal individual, right, I look at my full all-in cost when I lease a vehicle over if I purchase it myself, over if I get a loan and buy it, right? And I look at all those costs and I evaluate it all out. That's what I'm expecting that we're doing as a city and trying to determine what's the most advantageous.
I would never lease a vehicle personally, so.
I would not either. I did it once and I wouldn't do it again.
Chief, what is your new Lexus that you're driving? Where's the lease on that?
It's asset forfeiture, I can't talk about it.
So, that's good, that's helpful. Just so I understand this memo, essentially you're saying $923,500 in capital needs requests that have either been budgeted and we've not taken advantage of them, or they can be budgeted for 16.
There's so on the capital side, you're really looking at about $600,000 in equipment. The rest of that, there's another $200,000 that are what I would call the economic development, things that we've talked about building on.
But you put it in this
But I
number.
put it in the supplemental number,
Now,
yes.
can it be paid, are there any other buckets where that could be paid for, or does it have to come out of this line item?
It does not, I think, it does not have to, if, depending on the priorities that were identified, I think what we've talked about is some of the things related to economic development, may be more appropriate for creation of some sort of district, to start funding banners or additional trash cans or holiday decorations, things like
Sure.
that. We can look at that. The vehicles and equipment are going to be always competing in the general fund.
So, let's say we don't contemplate a new district, and we treat all of these items on this memo the same, and so you're really seeing $923,000 in need, and really the only amount of money, if we're going to keep the general fund at 2.56, is the difference between that and 2.7. That's what you're, so we have $923,000 in need. We have available $140,000. Obviously, if we're going to fund them all, or a larger percentage of them, then we've got to set some priorities, or at least provide some direction.
Right. And then we have the significant overages from the other things we've been talking up to this point. Right? The capital, the CIP, the stormwater.
Right. You've got some gaps in funding, you've got negative balances in out years, yes. Yes.
So
let me go back to your question was, if we were to make a recommendation today to fund the department #1 priorities, I would suggest lease of the frontline police vehicles, purchase of the case skid loader, the phone system, and the code enforcement truck replacement, which is a total of about $231,500.
I would argue to increase the big program.
The what?
The business improvement grant program from 23 to 50,000. Especially knowing that we turned away $30,000 last year.
Laura, I'm not tracking on your math, only because we've got police, frontline vehicles at 305, 500.
Yeah, but I'm suggesting leasing those.
Yeah, that's what
So
we're
we would reduce that to about 90, probably
Okay.
$95,000.
I wasn't picking up.
Sorry.
No, you said it, everybody else said it.
No. Okay, I was still hung up on that issue, but I didn't know where we were.
And then you said the phone system replacement.
So the patrol vehicle replacement, in the public works, the replacement of the skid loader and the attachments. I would like to see us not lease the public works heavy equipment. Those have gotten sort of jammed up into one replacement year. To the extent that we can spread those out and pay cash for those, I would like to see us try to accomplish that.
We can get some good depreciation.
No,
you don't
I think
I need to let that go.
Resale.
What's the
resale is the bigger issue than depreciation.
You sell it.
You're opening the door for me to say, yes, let that go, yes, let
We
that
can
go.
make some money.
And what was your fourth item beyond the phone system?
So, the code enforcement truck.
Okay.
And kind of looking at all of the departments and kind of spreading those requests out. The other thing, if you look at some of these smaller requests, what we do each year is we would look at, keeping these in a priority order so we can come back to you and say, if it looks like we're going to finish 15 better, let's scrape off mowers and a computer replacement and radar equipment, right?
Right.
Let's pick up some of those lower priorities, or as we
Cheaper.
What does the code enforcement truck entail?
It's a small pickup truck, so when they go out and.
So you're just talking about, I thought maybe it was like code enforcement all over. You're just talking about a pickup truck. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, that's what was throwing me off, was the code enforcement in front of me.
Can I ask?
Yeah, okay.
So, yes, go ahead.
Motorcycle, so we really think motorcycle replacement is over these other two things? I mean, what's the need for a motorcycle? What am I missing?
Well, right now we have two motorcycles. One's brand new and the other one I believe is 2007. And for years, we always had two motorcycle officers, and that would be a daytime and an evening time traffic person.
And so what is the benefit of having a motorcycle officer versus a patrol car officer?
Usually motorcycles, it's good for public relations. They also go to the schools. Motorcycles can sit and go places that cars can't, which is good for traffic enforcement because honestly our Tahoes are bigger than the Ford Crown Vics are. So it's a specialized tool. And at the end of the day, a motorcycle, if you look at it, a motorcycle with all the equipment's about $38,000 and a Tahoe is about $60,000 with all the equipment.
It's a lot cheaper to operate.
Yep. So.
That makes sense.
That old one is pretty banged up too, that definitely is.
Right. We thought
Do we
about.
have two motorcycle rated officers?
We have one. There's another one that is going to go to motorcycle school training this year. But we didn't want to buy him a new motorcycle this year and send him to training because as Pat will tell you that it gets laid down a lot. And I'd rather him lay down the old motorcycle and if they pass, then we'll get him a new bike next year. So.
Right.
So, and we will bring you very specifically, you know, how we think you should fit this in here. We wanted to at least expose you to the needs that have been identified in the department or the issues that we've heard the council raise or others in the community raise about those kinds of things to kind of gauge if there are some things that you don't want us to spend any time on fitting into this budget, let us know now, and we won't waste any time on that.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, here's my thought from a budget standpoint. I personally never want to get involved in this. It's not intended to sound in any way. I don't ever want to get involved in the operation of public works or police or the community center. If you fund the priorities that you talked about, it seems like we're dipping into general fund by around $92,000. So instead of it being the 2.57,
2.4.
we end up 2.4 or something, right? That's some change. We did, if you go back to the top 14, we had a fund balance, you know, that was $1.5 million, right? And so, and given the fact that we budget so conservatively, no, we can't count on it. But the carryover from last year to this year, you said was 900,000. Okay, so from that standpoint, if you want to fund them that way, and we just know going into the budget that we're going to take a hit on our fund balance from 2.57 down to 2.4, I could get my arms around that and live with that if we felt from a capital perspective or equipment perspective that got the departments what it needed. That being said, I'm never going to get in the management of the day-to-day departments, and if you came back to me and said, in a perfect world, because buying it in 15 would be so much cheaper than buying it in 16 or 17, I could get comfortable with the $2.3 million or some other perhaps lower number on fund balance. Because again, just as 90% with the community center is a great goal to have, I think 2.5, and I get it from a credit rating standpoint, ability to borrow and all that.
Right.
2.5 is an important number for us to always have, and it's within reach. But if
2.3
I don't want
is closer to what we've
right,
been.
but I also don't want to sacrifice the ability to deliver goods and services, or we wear out our staff and our employees because they don't have the right equipment, or they're unsafe if they're on the police side or public works side. So that's my thinking, and I want to leave it up to the day-to-day professionals and administrators. That's just from a budget standpoint, I'm comfortable with fund balance.
well, from a, as Bruce Kimmel was in a couple of weeks ago and we were talking, and I think the first question, he said hello, and then his next question was, do you have your audit and do you know where your ending fund balance is for 2014? And so I got out the book and I pointed to 2.4 million, and he gave us the high five. He said, Moody's or Standard & Poor's is really going to be excited to see that. And what we've talked about, and I think this is an important part of the conversation, is yes, we've made significant, that is a tremendous weight off of our shoulders in closing that gap, because we told Moody's or Standard & Poor's that we would close that gap with repayment from the gateway, and we didn't have to rely on the gateway to do that. We've done that, and we've taken care of that. From a credit rating standpoint, a 25% fund balance, there are many cities who have a 20% fund balance policy, okay? So there are some best practice standards out there as it relates to the amount of that fund balance policy. And as long as you're there or moving in that direction, I'm not sure that it's significant for Moody's that it's 20 or 25%. It's you're at or moving towards it and right at striving for that policy, because you're not, I think Lee Summit had a 20% fund balance policy. Gladstone, where I worked before, had a 20% fund balance policy. They did, you set that policy, you work towards that policy, that amount is not, as significant. So I think that's something, as we look at that, and now that we're back in that range, that is reasonable for us in terms of our operating budget, because you also want to look at, from a GFOA standpoint, maybe 3 to 4 months of operating costs is kind of that recommended target range for your general fund balance. So, we're there now, but again, I think we want to look at, and that's one of the things that I think we need to be sensitive to as we look at the other capital and supplemental requests, and we want to continue to make progress in that or other areas.
This might not be the only thing we'll need to take out of our general fund, correct? Or is this?
I'm hoping it will be. We don't know. We don't, yeah.
Do you know something I don't know?
No, I'm just saying that stormwater interceptor that I've been regular for 3 years is still up in the air on how we're gonna repay some of that stormwater.
Yeah, we had a shortfall, and as we talked about when we went through that, and we'll look at it again. When we get to 16, we do have that, if we don't get the special assessment coming in from the gate, if the gateway special assessment comes in at $600,000 a year, that gap is closed on the stormwater side.
Or if we make, lots more sales revenue than we anticipate with this new development.
Correct.
Either or.
So Laura, I'm going to page 5 of the memo. We haven't talked about these items, but so what does the Harley Woods demolition afford us? What benefit does, outside of that, it's a horrible site?
Yes. So let's go, let's start there, and then we'll come back and pick up the things on page 4. So what we wanted to do was put on here
we can go to page
things
4.
that we've heard. Well, let's just start with that one, because that's the biggest one on the list, and I think we're probably the one we've talked least about.
150,000?
Because of the joining to the building next to it?
Well, and the environmental issues, that's a much larger building and site than what you think it is.
Yeah.
So if we demolish this, what would we do? Would we make it
City's parking lot.
You could potentially. So here are the things that contribute to a conversation around Harley Woods demolition. We've literally had people call and email us and say, my gosh, people are making a really significant reinvestment in their properties along Johnson Drive, and you have one of the worst looking properties.
Right.
When are you going to do something about that? Right?
You should have said, did you see the Neff printing building? We own that too.
We had a conversation about the Neff printing building and how unattractive that was, and how important it was to us, regardless of whether we had it sold or not, to bring that property down. And we also have then a need or a conversation that's been identified through the Johnson Drive Parking Task Force about trying to identify additional parking opportunities short and long term in the downtown district. So Harley Woods building remains in the floodplain, which means that we can't sell it to someone, or we're limited.
And we can't develop it.
And we can't develop it because we're limited to the amount of money that could be put back into it, and it still be able to be insured. So the conversation then becomes, if we can't sell it and we can't turn it into something else, is our best option to just tear it down? And really that conversation is being driven by the public questions that we're getting and your own conversations about what do we do with blighted buildings that we own.
Sure.
Plus, we do need the parking. We've been talking about parking.
Yeah.
No,
But that's not that's not considered building because it's just a grade, right?
Right. And you can put, yes, you
You can put all kinds of parking in floodplains.
Yes.
Just look at all the parks and everything around all the trails.
Yes.
And if we build momentum with the farmer's market, right? I mean, more space will be needed.
Well, and more people are going to see it.
Absolutely. So, and I think there's
I'm
a lot
really
of people-
interested in this.
I think that's terrific, Amy. I would agree that.
Okay, so I think what we do at this point is, I think we need to maybe get a more detailed estimate, because we, and we can do that before we firm up the budget process. So if that's something that you want us to have a really serious conversation around, we'll add more detail to that and bring that forward.
I'm also very interested in the monument in wayfinding side purchase. So I don't really know what the wayfinding sign purchase is, but I would like to see us very seriously consider, and I keep saying I'll find that presentation we saw when we were down in Wichita, because it was so compelling. If you guys saw it, I think everybody would buy into it, to get rid of the metal signs that say welcome to Mission, and they were more beautifying, you know, and we could do a couple, this looks like we're just doing one, but I think we need to figure out how to get,
That's terrific.
maybe we could get Lane 4, have we gone back to them and asked them? I know it's all after the fact, but if they would do a little monument for welcome to Mission on that property there.
Well, I think we want to identify a couple of things that I think are going to come together this fall. So I think
that's what they meant by that.
I think, well, if you go back and you look at, I think there was a study from 2007, 2008, where we looked at monument entryway signage markers, and it was, they had kind of identified locations, primarily for Johnson Drive, but it was at Metcalf and it was at the east entrance and some things. We've heard in the downtown district task force that we have a lot of side doors and back doors. We don't have a very prominent front door entrance into our community. So we've got a variety of things that have been floating out there in terms of what does that look like, and that branding and that identity. I think that's also going to be a theme that rises out of the park master plan, because one of the things that we've heard so far is we don't have a clear, identifiable wayfinding signage system for our park system. So tying all of those together, I think may come back. And then the downtown district and the Johnson Drive Parking Task Force has also said that there's really smaller wayfinding within that downtown district itself, but I think the concept is larger. $25,000 is the drop in the bucket,
right,
ultimately where it would go with all of that.
Other something that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really important. I personally think that's really important.
And
but it's probably something different than what this says.
Streetlight banners, holiday decorations, trash and recycling receptacles we put on here, those are probably, as we talked about it at the staff, probably the things that would be the best candidates for funding through some other kind of downtown district.
And how much did it cost us last year to do the lights on Johnson Drive?
It cost us about $15,000 a year to do lights.
No, hold on. So it's different than those crazy star things.
Combination of both.
Yeah,
So
I don't want to do the crazy star things anymore, but the lights, we didn't do the star things last year. We just did the lights on the building. That's cost $15,000?
Well,
we didn't have the poles to hang the star.
Right. The star things are antique.
Vintage.
Yes.
Chic.
Throwback.
Yeah, we need to sell them we need good juju, might be interested in them.
They most likely will not go on the new decorative street lights. So the conversation is, what do we want to do to light downtown for the holiday season? That's a bigger conversation, so we put some money in there. But yes, so labor storage to just light the buildings the way we did is probably in the $8,000 to $10,000.
I could get away with doing that. I would be okay with doing that for one more year, right? At least. Okay. That's where I'm going. I would be okay with doing, I thought what we did last year was nice. I thought it looked nice. I don't think it was, this is just my opinion, right? I would love to see banners. I don't know banners. I don't care for the Miriam banners, for example. They're itty bitty, you can't even hardly tell it says Miriam. You can't even hardly see them.
What part of this works into our group that's looking at the potential signage for the businesses along Johnson Drive? Does that fit into?
Johnson Drive Monument and road signage.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure.
So if that's something that if we wanted to keep it a part of the conversation, we can certainly look at other alternative funding sources for some of those three in particular, the ones that I think we kind of identified for that. And if you flip back to page 4 and you look at expansion of the business improvement grant program, so we currently have $27,000 included in the 16 budget. For a while, we weren't even spending $25,000 to $27,000. This year, we've turned away at least that much in applications because we didn't have the funding to do that. So there certainly appears to be the capacity for $50,000 or $60,000, worth of business improvement grant.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially right now after getting Johnson Drive all done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, we talked about that
People are
the
gonna wanna
last
do
couple
that.
years.
Got the street looking good, now I need to get my police.
And then
What are you thinking?
the farmer's market we were talking about earlier, we funded the farmer's market in part this year because we weren't doing the Mission Family Festival and the barbecue.
Right.
If other events come back and if you still have a desire to support other events through the general fund, then we would need to layer some additional funding on top.
Did
to
it cost
continue.
$15,000 this year?
Not quite, but pretty close by the time we get to, and we had a couple of expenses this year with installation of the electrical panel so we can support electricity for the vendors and entertainment that are obviously one-time expenses that we wouldn't incur going forward, but we would.
Did we end up with a tent? Did we end up with tents?
No.
Not that we're supplying, no. Obviously, we would continue to seek sponsorship, and we're going to continue to seek sponsorship this year as well. I think that's probably, we get the market up and people can see it and touch it and feel it.
Is that a pretty accurate amount?
I think so, yes. You know, the market coordinator piece is going to continue to be really important.
But it's really hard to gauge an amount right now. This is like a pilot project.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. How do you even know? I mean, we haven't even started yet.
Well, it's a full-time job too.
So,
Full-time job.
I mean, if we can get by on $15,000,
Ladies that are
that would be
trying to
incredible.
put together.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is that money won't just walk in the door. I mean, you've got to chase it.
Oh, yeah.
Wrestle
All
it to
the
the
time.
ground.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you got to Susie Gibbs it.
Right.
There you go.
I mean, that's the only way we got money for. Because, I mean, she was just so diligent.
They're afraid of her. She'd go to the door and they're scared. I'll get it.
Anyway, so we can, you know, that's kind of, that's how we paid for it this year. You know, again,
Okay.
There will be a little bit of revenue coming in from that farmer's market, right?
yes. So there'll be vendors fees that come in. We do have some sponsorships that have stepped forward. So far, and we expect to
Are there
continue
any
to grow
cities
this.
that have the farmers markets that are actually breaking even on their farmers markets with their vendors fees or whatever else they get? I don't know if they get a
Sure,
percentage
Park
from their
does.
vendors.
I don't know, we haven't, we've been so busy trying to get ours open, we haven't done the math
Yeah.
on cost.
Really, because I don't even
Opie's got a
know
really good.
Yeah,
how
they got
that
pretty
money
good.
works.
They have a great venue and everything.
I'm just wondering if down the line we could
Anticipate.
anticipate. That is the exact
Okay.
word I was looking
I
for.
stole it right out of your mouth.
Anything else from a major policy standpoint that we haven't touched on, that you want additional information on, or that we can provide? So where we will go from here is we will take, we've given us direction on the capital side in terms of looking at options and alternatives relative to sales tax, relative to a whole variety of options on transportation utility fees, stormwater utility. We're going to give you breakdowns and options and kind of sliding scales about how, if you want to consider any changes there. We will kind of take the feedback from tonight and plug a capital number and a supplemental number into this base 2016 budget, kind of see what that does and what the impact of that is. And then go from there. We will have a budget work session on June 24th, which will kind of be our last pass through the 16 budget before we start to kind of take it on the road for public comment and feedback. So July is going to be kind of our month for public comment and feedback, and then we'll.
June 24th, is that what you said?
Yes.
I will not be here.
Okay.
If you have anything on.
Well, I was going to say, let's double check that date. So please let me know before the end of this week if June 24th is not a good date, and because I think that's going to be a really I don't think. That will be a really critical work session, in pulling all of that together.
We just had a business trip
On an aside note here, like I said, Amy Miller's cake is really, really good.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.
Very good.
Katie's
Somebody
on.
Dave,
needs to
I'm
take it
staring
home
at your
because
piece
I'm
of
not
cake, dude.
gonna.
Are you gonna get on that?
I'll throw
No,
it
I've
away.
never been a sweet
If it goes home.
Really? Excuse me, but.
He likes
Would you
sweets.
mind?
That's very good. I did want to say too, I don't know if it probably is a cumulative effort, Laura, but I appreciate the way you were taking us through the budget process.
Yeah.
Those who were here last year.
Here.
It looks and feels a whole lot different, and
Sweet.
I like the horizon that we're looking at, from a 10,000-foot view. It doesn't mean we can't get down into the
Well,
weeds.
last year's was an improvement over the previous year's
And I like
process,
the
and
options.
this year's even better, I'd say.
And thank you for giving us the options. So
Well,
that,
the
you know,
credit is spread
problems and then some possible
entirely
solutions.
around this room, because I can't tell you, this is a group of department heads that are committed to
Thank you, guys.
understanding and managing the budgets, and they're not afraid to tell us when a cut's gonna really have a serious impact. So we appreciate the ability to be candid in that,
Awesome.
and the other thing that I think,
We can't
and-
speak after that. We think we have to say goodnight, everybody.
I think that wrapped it up.
I mean, there is no thing that okay.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is the Direction Finder survey results will be back, should be back by mid-July, which is kind of our evaluation and that benchmark of citizen satisfaction with services and hopefully some direction on what should be our priorities in the next 2 to 3 years. And so the timing of that, I think, has the potential to be very helpful as we look at wrapping up the budget and having some level of confidence. And we're also adding a question at the end of Direction Finder that says, in the first survey, we asked if you had $100 to spend, what area would you spend it in? We're asking that question a little bit more specifically. So would you spend it on sidewalks? Would you spend it on streets? And then we're saying, would you support an increase in taxes or fees to make an increased investment in these areas? And then what level would you be willing to spend? $0 a month, $1 to $5 a month. So that will give us, that doesn't tell us necessarily what type of funding mechanism, but it gives us some ideas as we look at those options and alternatives about how it might impact something. So if somebody says, I'm not willing to spend, I'd be willing to spend $1 to $5 a month more to continue the maintenance of our streets.
Are we looking at those values to me, $1 to $5 is not, it doesn't seem like that would generate enough revenue to do anything of value.
A month.
$1 to $5
A month.
bucks a month.
$6 a month fixed jobs.
It's almost doubling itself.
Okay.
6 times,
Yeah.
what,
Okay.
72.
Okay.
What's KCP now going up this year, next year?
It's,
Well, we don't know yet. They're still, their rate increase was proposed at 12.5%. Is that what it was,
Yeah.
12.5%? Which means they won't get that, but it's something less than that. We included the full 12.5% in the budget, just to be conservative.
Okay.
We'll benefit on the revenue side of that and on the franchise fee side with whatever fee increase they get, as well, but
Good point.
yes, it is. Anyway, thank you.
Is there any way, without getting into the muck of things, to use a logic model when you look at things like, okay, would you be willing to spend X, Y, Z if the city continued to pay your trash? I mean, so they can see comparisons of what they're actually not paying now. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
The city is currently paying for X, Y, Z on your property
Right.
for you living in this city.
Right.
Would you be willing to spend $2 a month if you didn't have to spend $10 a month over here?
I think that's a good point, Debbie. Because you think about when you work, like the company I work for and all the companies I work for, every year you get this quote unquote benefit statement.
Right.
Here's how much the
Total
company's paying
compensation.
for you,
Right.
right? Here's your all-in
Right.
compensation. You get paid X, but we're providing you with all these benefits. So there might be some benefit, I don't know, to see if other cities go out and say, like, here's your year-end thing. Here's all the
It doesn't
benefits
help
and
to educate
services.
people on that, for sure.
It doesn't help?
I mean, it doesn't, it would help.
Yes, okay.
Double negative.
Yeah. I heard, I
It
said that
doesn't hurt to
first.
help, I'm like,
Thank you, I did
I knew what she intended to say, but I didn't hear that.
You knew I said that.
You can't educate them.
You know, I thank you.
That's what I heard.
Thank goodness, Tan's gone.
And that's exactly what I said.
So there might be some value for us to think about doing that, some kind of little, hey, here's everything we do. I'm
Well,
sure
or
there's other cities who
Especially
do
when
that.
your comparisons, like, well, Overland Park pays this, and Overland Park didn't pay for their trash. I mean, you know.
Right, but we should be
sometimes-
very, very careful
No, I know,
about.
not specific.
Education's always.
Other cities.
Yeah, I mean, even if we just say, here's what the city's providing for you.
There's
Just leave it
very
at that.
classic graph that many cities use that we've avoided using, but we can look at it, or some different forms. It's they take a dollar bill
Dollars we was.
and they take what percentage of every dollar, what percentage of every dollar that you give us is spent on police, on public works, on.
And why have
parks,
we
on that.
avoided using that?
It's a little,
Little trite.
yeah, it's a little, it's a little.
Elementary.
Elementary, exactly the word I was looking for.
So, but I think there's a way to get at some of that, that value for the investment
Yeah.
that you're making. And some of that may go back to some of the things that we see in the CAFR in terms of just, increasing net assets and, some of those kinds of things. It's difficult to translate.
It's
Yeah,
impossible to explain.
Right, and
$86 million in public assets.
I think you have to be really careful because, I mean, to the point you brought up earlier, Dave, there's been the capital increase, right? But that came at an expense,
For
right?
sure.
So what is the expense ratio involved with, you know what I mean, to that? I mean, did we spend X million and we're getting this much benefit out of it, right? Because you always spend more than you realize, you know what I mean?
No, the conversation, there's no easy place to end it, because then people will say, well, you didn't have to spend the money, when there's a big group of people that would rush in and say, well, we didn't have a choice, right? If we didn't fix stormwater, this community would be blighted right now, and there wouldn't be any investment coming in, right? So, I mean, there's no easy place to end the conversation, so once you pull the string in terms of this is what we did, or this is what we missed, or this is what we got for it, then it goes back to the motivations for why you did it, and if you had choices. So, I mean, it does get
How much you
complicated.
spent
Right.
and blah, 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 blah.
And that's also the piece that is always, I'll leave it at this, is that, there also has to be an obligation from the people asking the questions, or the people we represent, that if they really want to have the conversation, then they really need to have the conversation. If they want to search just for, God, that's too much, that's high,
Based on what?
Well, okay, well, we're done.
That's a lot of it.
Good conversation.
Well, yeah, but a lot of people, that's really the extent of their knowledge,
Well, I get it.
unless they're sitting around at this
I get it.
table.
But some of them are professing that knowledge to wider groups of people without the background to support it.
It's called the media.
Well, and that's why I think, I will really be
Never
interested
get the
to
full
see,
Social media.
what the direction finder, what that
Right,
You know, you-
level of
You
satisfaction
said
with the
page
quality of
28
services.
was your favorite page on there. 29 is my favorite.
Is it really?
Because it's debt reduction.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And you know, this city has.
And we didn't even
approved
mention much about
taxes
that, but that
twice.
was,
They've been
great. This is a
very
good year for
supportive.
us.
They've been very supportive of increasing taxes to get a new pool and increasing, street tax, and they don't turn down just everything.
That is very true.
Yep.
You know what, I think we should just leave.
Well,
Marcy,
listen,
calling
you
it
can
back.
act like you're in control, but Madam Chairwoman right
I
here.
just said think, I didn't say leave, I just said think.
Thank you, she says she's calling it, and I seconded it.
Don't
So
forget.
seriously, if anybody wants cake,
Eat
I'm
your
not
calendars
So how do I
for
get
July
my
11th,
checklist?
remember?
Anytime.
Supposed to have a bunch of cards printed out.
Thank you. And Debbie, sign up your
Well, you know, postcards, when I do the postcards,
Oh, here.
they can actually run the address on when they print the postcard. If I've got that.
What did happen to your phone?
You can go pick it up.
Yeah, so we had broken down for,
Yeah.
We just want registered voters, they can give me just that.
Right after Okay, sure.
Let's see how many are on the list.
So I guess I'm asking, do I need to go to them and have them do it?
We'll do it.